Our story begins with Chung, who has become the non-existent 13th ancestral witch, though he has no interest in fighting and only wants to reach the underworld. He plans to seek the protection of Lady Pingxin and occasionally offer advice to the other witches, but he never expected that after listening to his suggestions, the hot-headed ancestral witches would start using such clever tactics that even the heavenly Tao itself would be caught off guard. When the Great War arrived, the witch tribes simply announced their total withdrawal, leaving the demon tribe and the saints to fight it out alone. Imagine the scene. Inside the Pango Hall beneath the mountains, Chung sits above a pool of blood, absorbing the surrounding essence and killing intent. Suddenly, the mist clears to reveal his true form. Though he looks different from the others, he is indeed the genuine 13th ancestral witch. To be honest, he was a traveler sent here by a runaway truck, waking up to find himself surrounded by the 12 original ancestral witches. As he ponders his strange fate, he is rudely interrupted by Zhurong, who remarks that he looks a bit dim-witted, prompting Chung to quickly stand. When he sees his sisters, Xianming and Hutu, he is momentarily dazed. This reincarnation was certainly worth it. Then, the eldest brother Dijong asks what laws he controls. Chung freezes, realizing he has no innate power, and after an inspection, the others conclude he is lacking in strength. Thinking quickly, he claims this is Father Pangu's arrangement, allowing him to carry the laws of all the ancestral witches at once. By invoking the name of Father Pangu, he ensures that no one dares to argue. Sister Huta steps forward with a smile, watching him closely. She decides to let him try her power first, striking a drop of essence blood into his body, and Chung immediately sits down to refine it. Inside him, the inheritance of the 9 revolutions mystery art appears, and as he circulates the technique, he actually masters Huta's law. Opening his eyes, he finds all the witches staring at him. He tells them he feels wonderful and asks, quite boldly, for a few more drops. The witches burst into laughter, and Dijiang immediately tells Rushu to contribute. Without a word, Rushu forces out a drop of his own essence. Feeling the sharp power of the metal law, Chung realizes he has hit the jackpot, while the witches impatiently urge him to stop dazing and start refining. He quickly swallows Rush's essence blood and begins the 9 revolutions technique once more, focusing entirely on the process. When he opens his eyes again, the witches are ecstatic. Dijiang claps him on the shoulder, painfully hard, declaring that Panga's legacy has a successor. Then, each of them offers him another drop of essence. Looking at the 10 glowing drops before him, Chung is deeply moved by his new family. After leaving the group, Chung settled into Pango Hall to cultivate, but a later hunting trip nearly scared him to death when he saw the 12 ancestral witches. They fought like absolute maniacs, so he hurried back to the hall to stay hidden until Huta suddenly announced she had cultivated a primordial spirit. Chung was utterly stunned, as this was moving much faster than he had anticipated, all thanks to the advice he had given her earlier. He analyzed that because Hutu had the lightest, baleful energy, she succeeded. She then slapped his shoulder in praise for his great contribution. He winced in pain. These ancestral witches really don't know their own strength, but seeing her primordial spirit made him feel quite proud of himself. Deep down, he felt that the fate of the witch tribe might actually change, just as Zhurong squeezed over to ask if he could succeed too. Chung hesitated, unsure of how to break the news. Huta's success was due to her unique nature, making her a very special case indeed. The other witches would likely find it impossible, and Gonggong quickly pulled Zhurong back, telling him to stop dreaming of such things. The two immediately began to bicker until Dijiang kicked them both out of Panga Hall, leaving only 5 of them remaining inside. Suddenly, Dijiang asked who would win the war between the 3 tribes, and Chung shook his head, stating that Hongjun would be the only winner. Seeing Dijiang's shocked expression, Chung felt a secret joy. He wanted them to remember the absolute accuracy of his predictions. He then suggested, quite slyly, that they follow the 3 tribes and scavenge after their battles, a plan that was practically guaranteed to profit. Hutu asked if the tribes would truly fall as he said, and he smiled, asking only for a small favor in return, the ancestral dragon's essence blood. She readily agreed, leaving Chung delighted at the prospect of solving the tribe's reproduction issues before he returned to his own cultivation. He had already refined 5 drops of essence, and the interaction between the 5 laws was proving to be surprisingly effective as the witches began their move. Whenever the 3 tribes finished fighting, the witches rushed in to clean up the corpses and earn merit, leaving the warring tribes completely bewildered. Even Hongjun noticed something was off with the witch tribe, but since he couldn't calculate the cause, he could only remain quietly vigilant. The witches weren't foolish enough to confront the 3 tribes directly yet. Instead, they focused on growing their numbers by throwing battlefield remains into the blood pool. Soon, great witches like Qiyu and Xingtian were born, and Dijiang offered Chung his choice of clansmen to lead, which Chung promptly declined. Instead, he turned to Hutu to suggest a partnership, prompting Zhurong to immediately start teasing them about becoming a permanent couple. His suggestion about reproducing the tribe earned him a playful, yet heavy-handed slap into a wall from Sister Hutu. Sister Xianming added a kick for good measure, but with a blushing face, Hutu agreed to let him manage her tribe alongside her. By the time he refined his 10th drop of essence blood, the ancestral witches arrived. Dijiang excitedly announced the 3 tribes had truly withdrawn. Hota handed him 3 drops of ancestral dragon blood with a strange glare, just as news arrived that Hong Jun had emerged victorious. Dijiang was utterly convinced now, wondering aloud if the boy truly was the ancestral witch of wisdom, which was, of course, just a joke. Still, seeing the ancestral witches begin to trust him so deeply made him feel quite satisfied as Dijiang asked what else he knew. He revealed that Hong Jun would soon begin his sermons, a massive opportunity, so he rushed to refine all the essence blood before then. He practically dragged Dijiang and Zhu Juyin to help him. Though they were puzzled by his sudden desperation, they assisted him fully. He finally refined Dijiang's space law and then mastered Zhu Juin's time law, but he hadn't expected what would happen when all 12 gathered. The laws within his body suddenly went berserk, causing the entire Pango Hall to tremble as Sister Hutu rushed in, deeply worried. Seeing him in such agony, she paced anxiously until Dijiang and Zhu Juin acted decisively to suppress the violent energy. They taught him the 12 great formations of the heavens to unify the laws, and just as his primordial spirit was forming, a purple light flew from the depths of the hall. Dijiang gasped, recognizing it as the legendary primordial measuring ruler. This supreme treasure, equal to the pagoda of heaven and earth, entered his body to stabilize the formation and the 12 laws. The laws began to merge, and the phantoms of the 12 ancestral witches appeared behind him, slowly overlapping as the formation turned. Zhurong shouted in shock that it was the true body of Pangu, only to be promptly slapped away by an equally stunned Dijiang. The others were speechless, even as a faint shadow. This was the true Pangu, meaning he could eventually manifest it all on his own. His body and soul underwent a complete transformation, glowing with a restrained light as his spirit was etched with ancient law marks. He refined most of the primordial ruler, though the Panga phantom was still too faint to complete the process entirely. As he finally opened his eyes, the ancestral witches immediately crowded around him, with Dijiang looking more impatient than ever. Dijiang asked impatiently if he had truly refined the Panga true body. It seems the scene we just witnessed left the ancestral witches utterly shaken. He explained that this divine ability allows him to burn essence blood for a brief transformation, not quite the original Pangu, but a powerful trump card nonetheless. The ancestral witches were overjoyed, and feeling quite confident, he looked at Sister Xianming and challenged her to a spar, only for her to strike instantly. She sent him flying into the air, forcing him to quickly activate the Panga true body ability with a loud shout, calling upon the ancient power. A brilliant light flashed as his aura surged, shocking Sister Xianming back. Seizing the moment, he threw a punch to break through her defenses. He sent her retreating step after step, finally feeling a sense of triumph, and remarked casually that they should stop there to save her some face. Naturally, she saw right through his act. Xianming sneered, noting that his Panga true body didn't seem to last very long at all. She rushed him again to deliver another beating, prompting him to pull out the primordial measuring ruler in a panic until Dijiang finally called a halt. Bruised and swollen, he stopped, while Zhurong joked that he finally looked like a proper ancestral witch. After the others left, Sister Hutu asked him a worried question. She wanted to know why he was so desperate to increase his strength, sensing a hidden fear behind his recent actions. He remained silent for a moment before deciding to be honest, pointing out that even the mighty dragon, phoenix, and Qilin tribes eventually fell from grace. He warned that while the witches were flourishing, decline is an inevitable law. Sister Xianming immediately argued that they were Pangu's blood and couldn't be compared. He countered by reminding her that the ancestral dragon was also born from Panga's essence. Once the sisters left, he returned to his cultivation in the hall. His primordial spirit was formed, yet his realm was strange. While others reached Daiyuo Golden Immortal through one path, he required all 12 laws. The difficulty was several times higher than for anyone else, but his strength was proportionally greater as he took out 3 drops of ancestral dragon blood. He began refining the water and wood laws within them, noticing that as each law was mastered, a corresponding ancestral, which phantom would manifest. With the refining complete, the Panga mark became clearer. He could now throw 3 full power punches, making him significantly stronger than before. While the ancestral witches were born naturally mastering one law with ease, he had to laboriously engrave all 12 laws into his very being. Meanwhile, Dijiang and Zhu Juin were discussing Wu Tian's warning that the prehistoric world might not have room for the witch tribe forever. Zhu Juin admitted that although it was hard to believe, Wu Tian never spoke empty words, so they should probably follow his advice. As they prepared, the voice of Hong Jun suddenly echoed throughout the prehistoric world, announcing a sermon at the Purple Cloud Palace in 3,000 years. The ancestral witches were stunned. Dijiang marveled that Wu Tian's prediction had come true again and immediately gathered everyone to consult with him. Hong Juan's voice reached every corner of the world, yet it could not penetrate the Pango Hall. Upon waking, Wu Tian urgently insisted they set out immediately. Gong wondered why he was in such a rush with 3,000 years left, but Dijiang noted that with his space laws, no one was faster. We see them quickly traverse the prehistoric membrane and enter the chaos, flying steadily toward the distant Purple Cloud Palace. Outside the palace, the chaotic currents were pushed aside as the hall radiated a soft, divine light, and surprisingly, not a single soul was in sight. Dijiang remarked proudly that they were indeed the fastest, but just as the words left his mouth, the Sanqing suddenly rushed past them at incredible speed. In the blink of an eye they were overtaken, followed closely by Fuxi and Nuhua, who also passed them with ease, much to Dijiang's growing fury. He realized they were being targeted as their speed slowed to a crawl. Clearly, Hongjun was pulling strings behind the scenes. Inside the palace, Hongjun himself was quite puzzled. Having only recently attained sainthood, his control over the heavenly Tao was not yet absolute. Seeing the ancestral witches arrive so early made him doubt his own calculations, even though he had refined his divinations many times over. Left with no choice, Hongjun forcibly mobilized the power of the heavenly Tao to suppress the witches, allowing the Sanqing and Nuhua to enter first. He knew this was a risky move, as the witches had fierce tempers and a confrontation would be difficult to manage if things turned ugly. Furthermore, the witch tribe's fortune was currently at its peak. He couldn't simply strike them down, but he couldn't let them take all the seats either. Hongjun shook his head secretly. The Sanqing were Pangu's true successors, and he absolutely had to take them as disciples to borrow their immense luck. Nuhua, too, was destined for a great opportunity in the future, and her deep fortune was something he naturally could not afford to miss. After a brief moment of weighing his options, Hongjun acted decisively, then watched the witches warily, only to be met with a strange sight. To his surprise, after a brief moment of anger, the ancestral witches actually suppressed their tempers, an unheard-of display of restraint for them. They didn't explode on the spot because of Wu Tian's quiet counsel, though Dijiang still burned with a rage he could no longer keep silent. He called out to his brothers to take action, and as their powerful auras erupted, the laws surged forth just as Wu Tian had previously taught them. This time, things were entirely different. The ancestral witches held nothing back, their collective power erupting as their light collided with the purple cloud palace's aura. The surrounding laws of reality instantly fell into chaos, and we see the witches finally break free from their invisible shackles, charging toward the palace at full speed. Wu Tian breathed a sigh of relief, glad he had managed to restrain them from truly losing their tempers on Hongjun's doorstep, which, naturally, would have been a disaster. Just as he relaxed, several figures streaked past the witches. Among them were Zhen Yunzi and Han Yun, along with a solitary, arrogant figure known as Kunping. As Zhen Yunzi and Han Yun passed, they turned to give the witches a polite nod and a smile, as they were known for their gentle and friendly temperaments. Deep down, however, the two were quite puzzled. They felt their own powers flowing more smoothly than ever, yet the witches seemed to be struggling immensely. They had no way of knowing that while the witches were being suppressed by the palace, they themselves were receiving a secret boost from Hongjun. Watching the three of them vanish into the hall, Wu Tian was left utterly speechless, unable to believe the sheer audacity of such a blatant move. They had arrived first, yet at the final moment, Hongjun resorted to these underhanded tactics, hardly the behavior one expects from a dignified great Tao ancestor. In Wu Tian's memory, Hongjun's interventions were always subtle and seamless, but this move was remarkably crude. To be honest, it was almost desperate. In reality, Hongjun felt he had no choice. His carefully laid plans had been thrown into total disarray by the witch's unexpectedly early arrival. If he didn't intervene now, the future complications would be far worse, so he cast aside his elegance to wonder what variables had changed the witch's behavior. Hongjun's gaze swept over the group and finally settled on Wu Tian, but even he could see nothing, as Wu Tian's treasures shielded his destiny from prying eyes. By the time the ancestral witches finally entered the purple cloud palace, the Sanqing were already seated firmly upon the first 3 prayer mats. Contrary to what Wu Tian expected, there were actually 7 mats in total. Behind the Sanqing stood Fuxi and Nuhua, observing the room. Fuxi, possessing great wisdom, realized that a seat might bring trouble, so he chose to sit cross-legged behind Nuhua and whispered a warning to her. He noted that if this was a great opportunity, many would fight for it, and with the 12 witches and other masters present, they could likely only defend 1 seat. He decided to protect her from behind, leaving them with only 1 seat. Meanwhile, Zhen Yunzi, Han Yun, and Kunping took the 5th and 6th spots. Zhen Yunzi followed Fuxi's example and sat behind Han Yun instead of taking the 7th mat, at which point Wu Tian gave Hutu a gentle nudge. He urged her to take the seat since she had cultivated a primordial spirit, but Huda hesitated, looking at him with a gaze that seemed to ask for confirmation. Hutu whispered back, asking why Wu Tian didn't take it since he also possessed a primordial spirit. She remembered his earlier urgency, knowing these front seats represented a great destiny. Wu Tian simply smiled and gently pressed Huda down onto the 7th mat, then turned to the other ancestral witches and suggested they all sit together in the back. With a wave of his hand, he produced a row of jade mats for them. Meanwhile, Dijiang was fuming, certain that without Hongjun's interference, all 7 seats would belong to the witches. Before Dijiang could speak, Wu Tian sent a secret message to the group, pointing toward the backs of Han Yun and Kunpeng with a knowing smile. He told his brothers not to worry, claiming that soon Han Yun would give up his seat to them, and remarkably, he would even thank the witches for the favor. He challenged them to believe it, and the witches were so intrigued they forgot their anger, their collective attention shifting entirely toward the unsuspecting Han Yun. The ancestral witches stared at Han Yun with such strange expressions that they seemed to be silently asking if the man was actually a fool. Deep down, Wu Tian knew that while Han Yun and Jin Yuanzi were famous for being kind-hearted, they were certainly no fools, especially Jin Yuanzi. As the future ancestor of Earth immortals, Jin Yuanzi was a powerful being who held the Book of the Earth. To be honest, his wisdom was beyond question. What confirmed this for Wu Tian was seeing Jin Yuanzi decline the last mat to stand guard behind Han Yun, mirroring Fushi's protective stance over Nuwa. It was clear he realized the seats would cause conflict. Perhaps Han Yun giving up his seat later wouldn't just be out of kindness, but a calculated move. At that moment, a dozen intense gazes fell simultaneously upon the two friends, as the ancestral witches weren't exactly known for their subtlety. The pressure from those stares made Han Yun's expression stiffen, yet he maintained a forced smile and gave the witches a polite, nervous nod. He quickly turned to Jin Yuanzi, whispering frantically to ask what the witches wanted and why they were staring so blankly at them. He worried they might actually start a fight right there, but Jin Yuanzi was equally baffled, though he tried to remain calm in the face of the unknown. Jin Yuanzi reasoned that since this was the Purple Cloud Palace, the witches would surely respect Han Jun. Besides, they hadn't done anything to provoke them. After a long moment of hesitation, Jin Yuanzi finally gathered his courage and looked toward the group, his eyes settling on Wu Tian with a polite smile. Wu Tian signaled Dijiang to stop, feeling a bit speechless at how their blunt staring had clearly terrified the poor man, which, in fairness, was quite understandable. Dijiang gave a soft huff and looked away, beginning a low conversation with Zhu Jiuyin while keeping his ears sharp to listen to Wu Tian's response. We then hear Wu Tian laugh softly, telling Jin Yuanzi it was natural they hadn't met, as he rarely traveled through the great desolate lands. Wu Tian remarked that he had long heard of their reputation, noting that everyone spoke of the two of them as the rarest of kind souls in the great desolate lands. Hearing his friendly tone, Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun both breathed a sigh of relief. Their smiles became more natural, even if being called nice guys felt a bit odd. Seeing Wu Tian's sincere expression, they dismissed their doubts, and Jin Yuanzi humbly shook his head, claiming the ancestral witches were far too generous with their praise. He explained that they simply disliked conflict and sought a carefree life, hardly deserving such a title. Meanwhile, as they spoke softly, Sanqing and Nuwa looked over curiously. They were filled with confusion, for while they knew the 12 ancestral witches well, the history of this group was, well, unconventional, to say the least. During the Great Calamity, while others were in hiding, the witches had boldly marched onto the battlefields of the three tribes to scavenge remains with total confidence. That behavior had shocked everyone in the Great Desolate, but this man Wu Tian seemed to have appeared out of thin air, having never been seen before. Observing the witch's respectful attitude toward him, the onlookers were even more surprised. When he revealed his name, their eyes flickered with recognition. Most assumed he must be the most capable great witch serving under the ancestral witches, perhaps a trusted advisor they kept close for his wisdom. Only Han Jun remained deeply puzzled. Though he had not yet manifested, he was monitoring the Purple Cloud Palace and felt a strange ripple at Wu Tian's words. Han Jun frowned inwardly at the name, Wu Tian. As the first saint of the heavenly Tao, he found the name, which implied no heaven, rather distasteful. It felt vaguely confrontational, and combined with the witch's unpredictable nature, it left him feeling quite unsettled. He certainly didn't believe Wu Tian was an ordinary witch. If he weren't afraid of further provoking the ancestral witches, he would have used the power of the heavenly Tao to investigate the man's background right then and there. While these hidden thoughts swirled around them, Wu Tian and Jin Yuanzi continued their warm exchange. Wu Tian truly held no ill will and was genuinely interested in them. He figured that while the witches handled the fighting, he could manage the social connections, and Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun were certainly worth befriending. His words were so full of kindness that Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun felt a mutual desire to build a friendship, and the two sides hit it off immediately. As the conversation grew more animated, even Han Yun couldn't help but join in, turning with a smile to insist that Wu Tian must visit them once this was over. He promised that the ginseng fruit from Jin Yuanzi's manor was an incomparable delicacy. It seems Han Yun was quite happy to offer his friend's treasures as a favor. Jin Yuanzi didn't mind, merely giving his friend a playful look before smiling and promising Wu Tian a grand welcome should he ever visit. The rapport between them grew stronger by the second, and Wu Tian laughed heartily, telling them he would certainly hold them to that promise regarding the legendary fruit. We see the surrounding onlookers, including Dijiang and the other ancestral witches, blinking in utter confusion as they overhear this polite conversation. They had expected a heated debate over the seating arrangements, yet here everyone was, chatting casually about life and fruit. Suddenly, a sharp, cold sound cuts through the air, instantly silencing the trio's pleasant exchange and causing Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun's smiles to freeze. Wu Tian frowns, but before he can even react, the 12 ancestral witches have already turned 24 eyes toward the Sanqing brothers. Their collective gaze lands heavily on Yuanshi Tianzuan with clear hostility, and Dijiang immediately opens fire, demanding to know exactly what Yuanshi means by his tone. It seems Dijiang is more than happy to do the talking for Wu Tian. Meanwhile, Jin Yuanzi's heart skips a beat as his earlier thought about the witches being easygoing is proven quite wrong. Yuanshi lets out a cold snort, directed not just at the witches, but at Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun as well, who exchange a nervous, knowing glance. We see that the faces of the three brothers, Taiqing, Yuanshi, and Tongtian, have all turned dark as Yuanshi snaps that they are here to listen to the Tao, not to bicker. He demands to know if they think the Purple Cloud Palace is their own private home, and at his sharp words, Yuanshi's face flushes with a mix of anger and pride. Just as he is about to stand up, Taiqing calmly intervenes, reminding his younger brother that this is a saint's dojo and they must show respect to Hongjun. Wu Tian, finding the tension unbearable, speaks up with a smile, suggesting to Yuanshi that making friends and sharing knowledge is the true purpose of being here. He points out that Yuanshi is the one being confrontational, leaving the great immortal momentarily speechless, while Taiqing's eyes sharpen and Tongtian begins to wonder if Wu Tian has a point. Dijiang laughs heartily and slaps Wu Tian on the shoulder in approval, while Zhurong chimes in, claiming that the Wu clan is, in fact, the most reasonable group around. Wu Tian turns back to the ancestral witches with a subtle smile to keep them calm, before looking at Yuanshi again to deliver a gentle but pointed warning. He advises Yuanshi not to let his status as a pure descendant make him feel superior, a remark that nearly makes Yuanshi cough up blood from pure frustration. As the crowd watches in stunned silence, Wu Tian adds that Yuanshi is lucky Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun are so generous, or this wouldn't end so quietly. Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun look pale, their eyes pleading with Wu Tian not to drag them into this feud, though the Sanqing brothers are now focused solely on Wu Tian. Taiqing reaches out to restrain the impulsive Yuanshi, whispering that they are here for the Tao, while Wu Tian sends a private message to his two new friends. He tells them not to fear, for karma cannot be avoided simply by hiding, and he points to the very seats they occupy as a prime example of that truth. Wu Tian pauses for a moment, prompting a worried Hong Yun to ask if he truly believes there is something wrong with these legendary prayer mats. Wu Tian turns his head toward the back of the Purple Cloud Palace, where a crowd has gathered. Since the front seats are full, the latecomers must sit on the floor or use their own mats. However, those with status and power keep their eyes fixed on the front row, their gazes shimmering with golden light. Wu Tian realizes immediately that these must be Di Jun and Tai Yi. We see two figures in golden robes marked with the sigil of the Sun Star. The one with the more majestic aura is Di Jun, while the man beside him, looking even more domineering, is Tai Yi. Tai Yi carries an air of absolute authority, his presence standing out even among the elite gathered in the hall. Di Jun offers a small, polite nod, while Tai Yi simply frowns. Wu Tian nods back before scanning the rest of the crowd, spotting a figure drenched in a bloody, murderous aura, surely Ancestor Mingi. Mingi's eyes dart restlessly, scanning the people on the front row mats without bothering to hide his greed. Nearby stand Duke Dong, Queen Mother Shi, and several others Wu Tian doesn't recognize. They don't dare provoke the Sanqing brothers, and they certainly fear the numerous ancestral witches. Consequently, their predatory gazes shift toward Nuwa, Hong Yun, and Kuanping. Fushi looks on with clear displeasure, having already decided that no one will steal his sister's opportunity, not while he still draws breath. His sheer determination causes several onlookers to back off, which, unfortunately for the others, means more eyes are now fixed on Hong Yun and Kuanping. Hong Yun is at least backed by Zhang Yuanzi, but Kuanping sits alone, head bowed in silence since the moment he entered, not even glancing toward Wu Tian's group. Naturally, Kuanping is under the most pressure. Wu Tian finally withdraws his gaze and sends a divine message to Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun with a faint smile. He points out that with so many people in the palace and only 7 mats in the front, anyone with a brain can guess these seats represent a massive opportunity. Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun nod. They are well aware of the envious eyes on them, which is why they only claimed a single seat between them. Jin Yuanzi offers a bitter smile. It seems their reputation for being nice guys doesn't provide much of a deterrent. Even with Jin Yuanzi's protection, the glares directed at Hong Yun are just as intense as those on Kuanping. He even suspects that if the crowd weren't wary of Wu Tian, they might have already moved in to force them out. Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun sigh, finally catching Wu Tian's drift. Hong Yun signals to Zhang Yuanzi, suggesting they should perhaps give the seat to Wu Tian to avoid any lingering bad karma. At this point, they only know the seats represent opportunity. They have no idea that this is actually the path to becoming a saint, so they aren't keen on inviting trouble for an unknown reward. Deep down, Hong Yun just wants peace. He sighs, wishing only to spend his days with his old friend Jin Yuanzi, eating spirit fruit and discussing the Tao. He quietly sends a private message to Wu Tian. He offers the seat to Wu Tian, noting that the Wu clan is powerful and respected, so no one would dare try to steal it from him. With that, he prepares to stand up. Wu Tian immediately reaches out, using a gentle force to press him back down. He is genuinely surprised. It seems his hunch was right. They truly aren't willing to fight for this. Wu Tian realizes that in the original flow of destiny, Han Yun gave up his seat to Jane and Juanti, losing his chance at the primordial qi and inviting disaster. While it was Jane and Juanti who pressured Kunpeng and Yuanshi who insulted him, Kunpeng ended up hating Han Yun the most for starting the chain reaction. After all, if you can't beat the powerful ones, you target the nice guy. Wu Tian quickly sends a message, urging Han Yun not to act in haste. He explains that these seats consume one's own luck and destiny. The greater the opportunity, the greater the cost. Giving it up now would be a grave mistake. As the saying goes, to refuse a gift from heaven is to invite calamity. Han Yun, born from the first cloud and Panga's blood, has incredible luck. That luck earned him this seat, but if he gives it up only to be handed the primordial qi later, he will have exhausted his destiny twice over. Such a drain on his life force would be fatal. Though Han Yun wants to offer the seat, Wu Tian has no intention of taking it. He truly wants his friend to stay put. He tells them they should learn from the Wu clan. If anyone tries to force them out, they should simply be prepared to fight to the bitter end. In this vast wilderness, there are very few who could kill them without paying a devastating price. Han Yun falls silent, and Zhen Yuanzi begins to reflect. They aren't naturally combative, so deciding to risk their lives is difficult, but after a long moment, they look at Wu Tian with deep gratitude. Nearby, Dijiang has been watching closely. Though he can't hear the private messages, seeing Wu Tian stop Han Yun from rising tells him exactly what is happening. He is shocked that Han Yun was actually willing to give up the seat, but he is even more confused as to why Wu Tian would refuse such a prize. Dijiang quietly pulls on Wu Tian's sleeve, asking through a divine message why on earth he isn't accepting the offer. At this point, Dijiang is thoroughly impressed. Han Yun's look of guilt and gratitude is exactly what Wu Tian predicted earlier. What Dijiang doesn't realize is that Han Yun's guilt stems from the fear that giving the seat to Wu Tian would pass the burden of karma to the Wu clan. Dijiang simply cannot understand it. Everything is happening just as Wu Tian said it would, yet at the final moment, Wu Tian is the one backing away. He remembers how Wu Tian rushed the ancestral witches to get here and dealt with the chaos at the palace gates, assuming this seat was the ultimate goal. To want something so desperately only to push it away, Dijiang is baffled. Wu Tian just smiles and tells his brother to be patient and wait. Deep down, he hopes Han Yun can withstand the pressure and keep the seat, as changing this one event could shift the entire destiny of the world. Perhaps there could truly be a Saint Han Yun. Any change in the great flow is good for the Wu clan, but Wu Tian knows he cannot step in just yet. Wu Tian considers the weight of the primordial qi. If he accepts the seat now, he wonders if Han Yun and Zhen Yuanzi might eventually resent him for it. He worries they might think he exaggerated the danger just to scare them out of the seat, so he decides that now is not the time to act. His plan is to wait until Jane and Juanti arrive and the pressure on Han Yun reaches its peak before stepping in to shoulder the burden himself. That way, even if they learn the seat's true value later, they will see him as a savior while their resentment falls on the newcomers, which is quite clever, really. However, a question remains. If he takes the seat, will Han Jun still distribute the primordial qi according to the original flow of destiny? After the ancestral witches were blocked at the palace gates, Wu Tian realized that Han Jun is not as impartial as he seems. This seating order is no accident. It is a calculated move by Han Jun, and Wu Tian wonders if the great sage will remain indifferent if his carefully laid plans are disrupted once again. After a moment of reflection, he smiles freely, telling himself it doesn't matter since he never intended to rely on the primordial qi to reach sainthood anyway. To him, verifying the truth of this world is a far greater reward than any seat, so he stops overthinking and finds his inner peace. Dijiang, though still confused by the explanation, chooses to trust Wu Tian completely and gives him a firm, supportive nod through a divine message. He assures Wu Tian that all the brothers and sisters have his back, and he dares anyone to try and target him while the Wu clan is watching. To emphasize his point, Dijiang shoots a fierce glare at Yuanshi Tianzuan, who frowns until Taiqing whispers in his ear to endure just a little longer. Taiqing warns him not to cause unnecessary trouble as the lecture is about to begin, and Yuanshi is forced to suppress his rising anger. At this point in time, the three Pure Ones are still a united front, having stayed hidden in the Kunlun Mountain since the dawn of creation. They are the definition of cautious cultivators, rarely involving themselves in the affairs of the great wilderness, until now, as more figures arrive from the chaos. The space within Zixiao Palace seems to expand automatically to accommodate the crowd, yet every newcomer's eyes immediately fixate on the 7 people in the front row. The weight of those thousands of stairs creates an immense pressure, especially for Kunpeng, who feels as though he is sitting on a bed of needles. Nearby, Tai rests his hand on the chaos bell and urgently asks his brother, Dijuan, if they should finally make their move for those seats. He can sense that those 7 cushions hold a destiny far greater than the ones they brought themselves, and his patience is beginning to wear thin. As the room fills, Tai grows anxious that it will become harder to strike, but Dejuan simply frowns and tells him that things are not as simple as they appear. Dejuan knows it isn't that simple. The three pure ones are formidable, Fushi and Nuwa are not to be trifled with, and even Han Yun seems to have powerful protectors. Although Wu Tian and Han Yun hadn't said much, Dejuan saw how close they were and how they stood up to Yuanshi without a hint of fear. Even Dejuan felt uncertain about facing the 12 ancestral witches, but Tai's gaze fell on Kunpeng as he suggested they target the loner instead. He pointed out that Kunpeng was all by himself, suggesting they force him to yield his seat, so at least one of the brothers could secure a spot. As they prepared to move forward, Kunpeng grew alert and shot a wary, defensive glare at Dejuan and Tai, sensing the impending threat. However, Dejuan held Tai back, advising him to wait since the lecture was about to begin and the Saint Hanjun might be watching them from the shadows. He warned that causing a scene now would be a foolish risk if it meant missing the sermon. Of the two golden crows, Tai was the muscle, while Dejuan was the strategist. Tai hesitated, but ultimately listened to his elder brother and stepped back, though his heart was still filled with a lingering sense of frustration. Suddenly, two figures flew into Zixiao Palace, Jane and Junyi, who immediately scanned the room and locked their eyes on the front row. They headed straight for the front with a very clear goal, Han Yun and Kunpeng. Seeing this, Tai grew anxious, fearing they would miss their chance. He worried that these newcomers were about to strike, regretting that he had let Dejuan talk him out of acting first, only to let others reap the reward. Dejuan's eyes narrowed, but a faint smile played on his lips as he realized that Jane and Junyi had arrived too late to see Wu Tian's display of power. They had no idea how close Wu Tian was to Han Yun and Zhen Yuanzi, so Dejuan whispered to Tai to stay calm and enjoy the show that was about to unfold. Tai immediately understood his brother's meaning and watched with intense curiosity, secretly hoping for a confrontation between the newcomers and Wu Tian. Wu Tian, sensing their approach, turned around with a knowing, half-smile that made Junyi pause in his tracks for a brief moment. Junyi quickly shifted his expression to one of profound misery, lamenting loudly about the long, dangerous journey they had endured all the way from the west. He wailed about arriving late and finding no seats left, even managing to squeeze out a few real tears, which, to be honest, was quite a performance. Beside him, Jane sighed with a face so naturally sorrowful he didn't even need to cry to look absolutely miserable, though the crowd remained largely unimpressed. Many of the gathered cultivators frowned at the display, with several cold snorts echoing through the hall, as if to ask why being miserable entitled them to a seat. We must remember that Jane and Junyi are spirits from the western heavens, a land that had been devastated during the great cataclysm of the dragon and Han. The great war between Luoho and the Taoist ancestors had shattered the western heavens, as Luoho drained the earth's veins there to forge his immortal slaying sword array. With its veins drained, the West became a barren land of thin spiritual energy and scarce life, though the cultivators in Zixiao Palace felt this was hardly their concern. It wasn't a debt they owed, and as Junyi continued his tearful lament, many met him with disdainful glares. However, Junyi's heart was firm and his skin was remarkably thick. Despite the judging eyes of so many peers, he remained unfazed, continuing to recount the miseries of the West and the tragic plight of he and his brother. At the same time, he stared fixedly at the backs of Han Yun and Kunpeng with a gaze so intense it made them both feel incredibly uneasy. While wailing, he kept his eyes locked on them with a piercing light. Han Yun sighed inwardly, remembering the warnings Wu Tian had given him earlier. Han Yun gritted his teeth and tried to ignore the incessant chatter behind him, but right then, Junyi suddenly began to circulate his magical power. An invisible force surged toward Han Yun and Kunpeng, nearly knocking them off their meditation mats in a sudden, aggressive burst of energy. Their protective auras flashed instantly as they forced themselves to stay seated, and a frustrated Han Yun turned his head to glare back at Junyi. Kunpeng lowered his head, his expression darkening like ink, while Zhen Yuanzi joined Han Yun in frowning at Junyi for his blatant interference. Yet Junyi merely put on a face of pure supplication, acting as if he hadn't just attacked them, and begged the fellow Taoists to yield their seats. He promised they would be eternally grateful, claiming the future spirits of the West would remember this kindness, a bold claim, to be sure. His gaze remained unshakable, showing he wouldn't stop until he got what he wanted, leaving Han Yun to take a sharp, cold breath of disbelief. He realized that someone this shameless, attacking one moment and playing the victim the next, was the most difficult kind of person to deal with. A trace of worry grew in Han Yun's heart. If he refused, he might face a battle, and even if he kept the seat, being targeted by such men was dangerous. Both he and Zhen Yuanzi suddenly felt a pang of regret, thinking it might have been better to simply give the seat to Wu Tian earlier. Thinking this, they instinctively looked toward Wu Tian, though they felt too embarrassed to ask him to step in and solve their problem now. Seeing their plight, Wu Tian realized the moment had finally arrived, while Junyi wondered why they were looking at this stranger with such expectation. Junyi wasn't worried, as he didn't recognize Wu Tian and assumed he wasn't anyone important. He was, after all, a man who chose his targets carefully. He didn't dare provoke Fushi or Nuwa after seeing Fushi's determined look, and he avoided Ho Tu as well, leaving his sights set firmly on the others. We see that although Han Yun and Kunpeng had Jin Yuanzi by their side, Junti had already sized them up and knew their temperaments well enough to smile dismissively. He suggested that if the two of them would simply fulfill his brother's needs, they would owe them a great debt of karma, all while beginning to push toward Han Yun. Suddenly, Wu Tian reached out a hand to stop him, calmly asking if Zhuanti intended to steal Han Yun's seat without even consulting him first. Jane and Zhuanti turned their gazes toward him, eyes flashing with hostility as they demanded to know who this meddler was and why he dared interfere. They noticed he sat with the ancestral witches, yet he lacked their typical violent aura. Not realizing he was a witch himself, they spoke to him with utter contempt. Zhuanti even considered attacking this newcomer to make an example of him, a classic case of killing the chicken to scare the monkeys, to force the others to yield. Meanwhile, the other great deities who actually knew Wu Tian's identity wore expressions of amused anticipation, waiting to see how this would play out for the brothers. Wu Tian, completely unfazed by their posturing, casually remarked that Han Yun had already promised the seat to him, so his opinion was the only one that mattered. Before he could even finish, Zhuanti interrupted with a cold snort, asking who Wu Tian thought he was to dictate terms, while reaching for his seven treasures tree. But before he could strike, a thick, suffocating wave of killing intent forced him back a step as Di Jiang and the others stood up in unison. Di Jiang didn't care in the slightest that they were in Zixiao Palace. He threw a punch at Zhuanti without hesitation, while Zhu Juyin moved against Jane. The other ancestral witches were also ready to strike. No one expected Di Jiang and Zhu Juyin to actually start a fight here, showing a level of dominance that completely ignored the sanctity of the saint's palace. Jane and Zhuanti were sent reeling back several steps, their internal energy shaken as they stared at the ancestral witches in absolute shock. Zhuanti was terrified. He had only dared to use subtle tricks against Han Yun, never imagining the witches would be so direct and violent. His face was a mask of fury and hesitation. While the witches didn't seem to care about the consequences of a brawl, the brothers certainly did. They tried to argue that this was a saint's domain where the witches shouldn't be so arrogant, but Di Jiang simply took another menacing step forward. As the surging killing intent washed over them, their faces grew pale. It was then that Wu Tian stood up and gently restrained Di Jiang. With a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, Wu Tian agreed that Zixiao Palace was a place for listening to the Tao, not for brawling. He suggested they simply record this debt for now, promising that once the sermon ended, the witches would visit the West to settle the matter personally. As Jane and Zhuanti's expressions shifted dramatically, we see that Wu Tian's words had drawn the attention of everyone in the hall. They had noticed his lack of a violent aura. He had seemed so cheerful, yet his words carried the unmistakable dominance of the witches. Naturally, many began to whisper about how overbearing the witch tribe truly was. Di Jun and Tai Yi, who had been waiting for the show to start, exchanged amused glances. Di Jun's eyes seemed to say, "See, I told you they couldn't help but strike." He gazed toward the depths of Zixiao Palace, wondering why Hong Jun had yet to appear. To be honest, it was quite strange that the saint remained silent. He wondered if Saint Hongjun truly didn't care that the witches were brawling in his palace, an act that was, essentially, a complete lack of respect for his authority. Deep within the palace, Hongjun watched the conflict with a furrowed brow. He was already quite displeased with the witches, as they had nearly ruined his previous plans. They had forced him to intervene before, and now here they were again. He couldn't help but wonder why this tribe constantly acted outside the flow of heavenly fate. Hongjun was genuinely puzzled. According to his design, Honyun should have yielded his seat to the brothers, and Kuenping should have been forced down as well. Only then could he grant the primordial violet qi to the two brothers. It wasn't that he favored Jin and Zhuanti, but rather a matter of settling a massive debt. The ancient war between Tao and Demon had nearly shattered the West, leaving its spiritual energy depleted and life scarce. Hongjun simply wanted to resolve that karma. He needed to settle the debt he owed to the Western world. His plans were being disrupted, yet he couldn't personally strike the witches. He sighed, realizing that being a saint meant being bound by the constraints of the heavenly Tao. The next era was destined to be the age of the witches, and he could not interfere with that great cycle. After much deliberation, he finally made a decision. Meanwhile, back in the hall, Zhuanti's face went through a kaleidoscope of emotions under the weight of Wu Tian's threat and the collective gaze of the other deities. Finally, he composed himself and bowed toward Wu Tian, apologizing and claiming they hadn't realized Han Yun had already promised the seat to him before they approached. He asked for Wu Tian's understanding, bowing to both him and the ancestral witches. This sudden, soft attitude caught the aggressive witches completely off guard. Di Jiang turned to Wu Tian in confusion, asking what was wrong with these two. To him, it seemed as though their brains had been rattled by the brief exchange. Despite being attacked, they had performed a total U-turn in their attitude, choosing to humble themselves immediately. The crowd of onlookers was just as stunned. A wave of whispers broke out as everyone watched Jane and Junie back down after a single threat. It was a rather pathetic display, all things considered. Yet the brothers didn't even blink at the judgment of the crowd, which left Wu Tian quite impressed. It seems the legends about their thick skin were true after all. Juanti gave a subtle nod, and after the group of ancestral witches sat down, Wu Tian decided not to pursue the matter further since they were within Zixiao Palace. On the surface, he remained calm and composed, but deep down, he grew even more wary of Jane and Juanti. In the original timeline, these two were destined to become saints. He wasn't worried about them becoming saints, but a saint who has no sense of shame and ignores all rules, well, that is a bit of a headache. After all, it is easier for a thief to strike than for one to stay on guard forever, especially when dealing with two saint-level thieves. And he wasn't the only one thinking this. The way Tai Ching, Fuxi, and Di Jun looked at the brothers changed instantly. They didn't know the future, but they could sense just how dangerous these two truly were. Di Jun sent a private message to his brother, noting that those who can bend and stretch like this will surely achieve greatness and hold a place of power in the Great Desolation. Tai Yi, whose personality was far more domineering, couldn't stand Juanti's behavior. Despite his respect for Di Jun, he couldn't help but argue that the path of Tao requires moving forward. He wondered how someone could achieve anything with such a character. Juanti had bowed and apologized the moment Wu Tian threatened him. To Tai Yi, it was pathetic. Di Jun shook his head with an amused smile at his stubborn younger brother. He explained that sometimes, stepping back is the only way to move forward, and showing weakness can overcome strength. If anyone else had made that threat, it wouldn't be a concern, but when the witches speak, they actually follow through. They are quite literal like that. The Western duo knew that the lecture was about to begin, a crucial time for cultivation. If they kept clashing with the ancestral witches, they risked more than just their pride. Even if their lives weren't in danger, their cultivation would be delayed. Besides, they had to consider if they could even make it back to Zixiao Palace for the next lecture. When viewed that way, Juanti's handling of the situation, while a bit embarrassing, was actually the most stable and clever path to take. To be honest, it was quite pragmatic. Admitting defeat to the ancestral witches wasn't a disgrace. Having learned their lesson, Jane and Juanti didn't dare cause more trouble, nor did they want to sit near the witches. Instead, they walked behind the three pure ones, seating themselves behind Taiching and Yuanshi. Taiching's expression didn't flicker, and he chose to remain silent as they settled in. Once the two brothers retreated, Xinyuanzi, Hongyun, and even Kunpeng breathed a collective sigh of relief. The tension in the air finally began to dissipate, and Hongyun stood up. He turned to Wu Tian, suggesting that he should take the prayer mat instead. Since Wu Tian had claimed the seat was already promised to him, it felt wrong for Hongyun to stay. Furthermore, after the recent chaos, Xinyuanzi and Hongyun felt that the karma attached to these mats was far too heavy. It wasn't something they were eager to be entangled with. As Hongyun spoke, Xinyuanzi nodded in agreement. Wu Tian felt a stir of interest, but he ultimately shook his head and refused the offer, telling Hongyun not to worry. He assured Hongyun that no one would dare trouble him now. Wu Tian was curious. If Hongyun didn't give up his seat and lose his luck, what would his future hold? We have to wonder if this will change Hongyun's fate, his death and eventual reincarnation as Shinno. Furthermore, Kunpeng is still in his seat, meaning he hasn't lost his place yet. Without that loss, Kunpeng has no reason to resent Hongyun or ambush him later. However, this time Hongyun was firm. He used the excuse of standing up for Wu Tian to make his move. He argued that if he kept the seat, his excuse would ring hollow, and others might look down on the witches. And so, ignoring all protests, he simply stood up. He sat down next to Xinyuanzi, his expression instantly relaxing as if a massive weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Seeing Hongyun like this, Wu Tian knew there was no turning back. Wu Tian realized he couldn't change Hongyun's mind, but he didn't plan to take the seat himself. He had no interest in the primordial qi, nor did he intend to follow the path of the three corpses. Since he carried the laws of the 12 ancestral witches, he intended to follow Pangu's path, achieving the Tao through sheer strength. In this context, proving one's Tao through strength doesn't refer to a specific law or the great Tao itself, but rather reaching a pinnacle of personal power so absolute that one stands upright and unchallenged. There was another factor, too. Wu Tian suspected that even if he sat there, given how Hongjun had already interfered, the sage might not distribute the primordial qi based on the seating arrangement at all. After all, how the qi is distributed is entirely up to Hongjun. With that thought in mind, Wu Tian turned toward Di Jiang and suggested with a light smile that his elder brother should take the seat. Di Jiang didn't even stop to consider it. He simply waved his hand and laughed, noting that he lacked a primordial spirit, so such things were useless to him. Even if a heavenly opportunity was right in front of him, what could he do with it? If it weren't for Wu Tian's insistence, the witches wouldn't have even bothered coming to Zixiao Palace. Wu Tian nodded slightly and turned his gaze toward Xianming, suggesting that she should be the one to take the seat instead. Xianming was about to decline, but Di Jiang just laughed. He teased Wu Tian, saying he knew the boy was closer to Xianming and Ho Tu and would naturally think of them first. Since Ho Tu had the first seat, giving the second to Xianming seemed fitting. A faint blush crept onto Xianming's pale, cool face, and she gave Di Jiang an annoyed look. She reminded them that she also lacked a primordial spirit, but Wu Tian wasn't listening. He ignored the technicalities and used an invisible force to pull her over while she was still speaking. He placed his hands on her shoulders and guided her toward the mat. He told her not to overthink it and to just sit down in peace. Feeling the warmth of his hands on her shoulders, Xianming quickly circulated her power to gently push him away. They had fought side by side countless times and shared plenty of physical contact, but for some reason, this moment felt entirely different to Xianming. She felt a strange, tingling heat where his hands had been. After pushing him back, she didn't actually get up to refuse the seat. Instead, she glanced over at Ho-Tu. Seeing Ho-Tu's knowing, playful smirk, Xianming quickly looked away and decided to stay. She told herself that if Ho-Tu could do it, so could she. Wu Tian had secured this seat, and since she had spent so much time training him and worrying over his combat skills, he felt it was only right to finally pay her back. With those thoughts in mind, Xianming turned back and gave Wu Tian a soft nod, while the others in Zixiao Palace watched the witches politely offering each other the seat. Their eyes were practically turning red with envy. The very seats they desperately craved seemed utterly insignificant to the witches, leaving Zhuanti to sigh in silent frustration. He wondered why they had made such a fuss to snatch the seat if they didn't even care about it. Even Hong Yun, who had just given up his own spot, stood there dazed. It took a long moment before Hong Yun could manage a bitter smile and lock eyes with Xinyuanzi. Deep down, he felt a lingering trace of regret for what he'd lost. He had even wondered if Wu Tian had come specifically for this seat, but that suspicion vanished instantly, replaced by a heavy wave of guilt for doubting his friend. As Xianming finally sat down, the order of the last 3 seats shifted to Xianming, Kunpeng, and Ho-Tu's Dijiang's gaze became sharp and piercing as it landed on Kunpeng's back. Dijiang leaned in and asked Wu Tian if they should take action, gesturing toward Kunpeng's silhouette while releasing a faint, chilling, killing intent. The pressure made Kunpeng's frame tremble violently. Wu Tian considered it for a moment before deciding it wasn't necessary, though he found the irony of the situation quite amusing. In the original timeline, Kunpeng was a truly tragic figure. He had managed to secure a seat only to have Jin and Zhuni snatch it away because he lacked the strength to stop them. Driven to a powerless rage, he had eventually vented all his fury on Hong Yun. Yet this time, Wu Tian's intervention had actually benefited the old bird. Because of the earlier chaos, no one else dared to challenge Kunpeng for the seat, fearing the witches might jump back into the fray. Hearing this, Dijiang nodded and looked away. As Dijiang withdrew his overwhelming aura, Kunpeng felt the crushing pressure vanish instantly. He let out a long, shaky breath of relief. Glancing toward Wu Tian out of the corner of his eye, Kunpeng felt a strange surge of emotion. After a long silence, the usually quiet Kunpeng finally spoke up. He whispered to Wu Tian that he now owed him a great favor, promising that this karmic debt would certainly be repaid in the future. Wu Tian looked back at Kunpeng with a faint smile. Indeed, Kunpeng owed him a massive debt, and not just for the seat he was currently sitting on. In the original history, when he was kicked off his seat, Yuanshi Tianzuan had insulted him with those famous, biting words about being a mere creature of fur and feathers. That insult had utterly destroyed Kunpeng's dignity. But now, with the timeline altered, that humiliation would never happen. Kunpeng had escaped his shameful fate. Wu Tian didn't say much, simply giving Kunpeng a polite nod before turning his attention forward to wait for Hongjuan's arrival and the start of the sermon. He remained quiet as the teaching began, reflecting on how much he had already changed and how much remained the same despite his efforts. He wasn't one to force things, but he couldn't help but ponder the current situation. Jane and Zhuanti had no seats, while Xianming and Kunpeng were now firmly in place. With Kunpeng secure and his usual resentment toward Hong Yun avoided, we have to wonder how the grand design will unfold, and if Hong Jun will truly grant the primordial violet chi to Xianming and Kunpeng, or if he will favor Jane and Zhuanti as history originally dictated. As time passes, the stream of newcomers begins to thin out. Soon, the 3,000-year limit is reached. Suddenly, a strange tremor ripples through Wu Tian's heart, and as we look forward, a solitary figure is seen sitting at the front. The figure sits with an indifferent expression, surrounded by an endless cloud of Taoist rhythm, while a jade-colored disc floats above his head, radiating the power of the laws. This power connects him to the void behind. It is Hongjun. The jade disc is, of course, the fortune jade plate, and Wu Tian is startled to realize he didn't notice him arrive. It is as if the sage had been sitting there all along, invisible until this very moment. Then, Hongjuan's deep, ancient gaze shifts, locking directly onto Wu Tian's own eyes. The impact is like a bolt of lightning, sending a violent shock through Wu Tian's soul. In an instant, his internal magic begins to circulate of its own accord to protect him. The primordial measuring ruler erupts with a mysterious golden light within his spirit, and the mark upon his soul begins to flicker. To be honest, it was a close call. His destiny and aura are instantly suppressed by the ruler and shielded by the true intent of Pangu within his soul. Hongjuan's eyes flicker as he lets out a silent, inward sigh. The sage withdraws his gaze, wondering how Wu Tian could possess such luck as to be protected by a supreme treasure of merit. Even Hongjun feels a bit of rare envy. Though he possesses many treasures, he is not a single supreme treasure of merit. These are born of Pangu and are naturally tied to Pangu's true descendants. He knows, for instance, that Taiching possesses the heaven and earth pagoda, and he has never dared to covet it. Yes, even a sage has rules he must follow. Because the treasure suppressed his probe, Hongjuan's brief glimpse fails to achieve its purpose. He is forced to give up his plan to peek into Wutian's secrets. He had hoped to uncover some hidden mysteries while Wutian was off guard, but now he must extinguish that thought. One cannot be too blatant, after all. Upon becoming a saint of the heavenly Tao, Hongjun realized that while he can borrow its power, he is also bound by its many constraints. It is a heavy price to pay. Before his ascension, he might have acted recklessly to uncover Wutian's secrets, but now he must strictly follow the rules of the heavenly Tao he represents. Breaking the rules he is now a part of would be quite foolish, wouldn't it? As the pressure vanishes, Wutian frowns, his gaze lingering on the sage. He knows perfectly well that this wasn't an accidental display of power, but a deliberate probe by Hongjun. Deep down, he feels a surge of silent defiance. But what can he do? Hongjun has already looked away, acting as if nothing happened, leaving Wutian to hide his annoyance and keep his thoughts to himself. At that moment, the others finally notice Hongjuan's presence. A wave of commotion ripples through Zixiao Palace before everyone bows in unison to offer their greetings. The crowd erupts in gratitude, thanking the sage Hongjun for agreeing to preach to them. Hongjun gives a slight nod, appearing completely indifferent to the ancestors' reverence. His gaze sweeps across the 7 seats before him, and he calmly declares that this seating arrangement is now permanent. Everyone quickly voices their agreement as he turns toward the entrance. Looking at the 2 young attendants by the gate, Hongjun announces that the time has come to close the doors of Zixiao Palace. These 2 children look like they were carved from fine jade. The boy and girl stand, bow deeply to the sage, and begin to push the massive doors shut. Wutian watches them with genuine curiosity, having been too busy securing a seat earlier to notice them. These are the legendary Hao Yin and Yao Qi. They may look like simple children, but we shouldn't let their appearance fool us. Being the personal attendants of a sage is no small feat. In the future, Hao Yin will even ascend to the throne of the heavenly emperor to rule the heavens. In fact, the great tribulation of the investiture of gods will eventually be sparked by his grievances. The disciples of the 3 cults often look down on Hao Yin, but they forget that he also listened to the sermons in Zixiao Palace. He was essentially their classmate, if you think about it. Wutian feels a brief urge to mock their arrogance, but he quickly checks himself. To be honest, considering his own position, he finds the potential for internal chaos quite beneficial. He lets out a silent, inward smile. As a member of the Wu clan, the more disordered the internal affairs of the Taoist sects become, the better his own starting position will be. Once the heavy doors of Zixiao Palace are sealed, the crowd turns their burning, expectant gazes toward Hongjun. Their thirst for knowledge is so intense, it's almost palpable. Hongjun doesn't keep them waiting. He begins with a simple opening, explaining once again his reasons for preaching here in the palace. It is a matter of divine duty, after all. As a saint of the heavenly Tao, he is tasked with educating all living beings and maintaining the world's balance. And so, he says, I shall now begin the transmission of the Tao. Suddenly, Hongjuan's aura shifts. A profound Taoist rhythm spreads through the palace like a rising mist, and Wutian immediately focuses his mind to absorb the coming wisdom. The sage begins to speak of the great Tao and the path to becoming a carefree immortal. We learn that for a saint, further progress depends on the accumulation of merit and providence. The best way to gather this merit is through education and spreading one's teachings. It is a calculated move, though a benevolent one in its own way. Hongjun naturally uses this opportunity to spread his immortal Tao across the entire primordial world. The more people who practice his path, the stronger his own influence becomes. As the master of the immortal Tao, he receives a boost from every practitioner. Every breakthrough a follower makes serves to expand the boundaries of his own power. To put it in more modern terms, it's like employees working hard to improve a company's performance. They might get promoted, but ultimately, they are enriching the chairman. The only way out of this cycle is to start your own business, or in this case, to forge your own unique path. Otherwise, you are simply a part of his grand enterprise. One could try to innovate within the system, which is like creating a subsidiary company under the main corporate umbrella. It is a complex game of spiritual influence and power. While a subsidiary must give up a portion of its shares, it at least gains some autonomy. This is how Taiching will later achieve sainthood through the golden elixir Tao. The same applies to Yuanshi and Tongtian, who will find their own paths. According to Hongjun, the realms of the primordial world are divided into several distinct stages. We have the heaven, true, profound, and golden immortals, followed by the Tai and Daluo golden immortals. Above these lie the Hunyuan golden immortal and the Hunyuan Daluo golden immortal. These are the realms of the immortal Tao, which would eventually become the standard for the entire world. To be clear, a quasi-saint is essentially a Hunyuan golden immortal. A saint, however, is a Hunyuan Daluo golden immortal. But there is a crucial distinction to make. While every saint is a Hunyuan Daluo golden immortal, the reverse is not always true. Only those who attain the Tao and entrust their primordial spirit to the heavenly Tao can truly claim the title of saint. It is a very exclusive club, as you can imagine. From that point on, they are blessed by the heavenly Tao, becoming truly immortal. Hearing this, the crowd in Zixiao Palace nods, finally grasping the concept of a saint. Their eyes shine with a new light, and they look as if they want to ask how to achieve sainthood immediately. Hongjun then begins his lecture, starting from the heaven immortal realm. As he explains the immortal Tao, the palace begins to transform. Golden lotuses bloom from the ground, and celestial flowers fall from the sky in a magnificent display. Vast amounts of spiritual energy gather, and the laws of the universe manifest like shimmering silk ribbons. They flutter through the air, weaving a tapestry of pure wisdom throughout the hall. As Hongjun explains the path, Wu Tian begins to validate his own cultivation. His 9-turn primordial palace technique starts to rotate with a thunderous roar within him. His physical body feels a sudden, intense hunger, and his primordial spirit shines brilliantly. The mysterious artifact suppressed within his spirit begins to turn slowly. It radiates a mysterious golden light, creating a powerful suction force. The energy and laws within Zixiao Palace come rushing toward him, and he begins to devour them greedily. A massive vortex forms above his head like a funnel, and countless celestial flowers and golden lotuses are poured into it. It is quite a sight, to say the least. He isn't just cultivating his spirit. Under the blessing of this immense Taoist luck, his body, soul, and spirit are all advancing together. The 9-turn primordial palace is proving its worth. It is truly a formidable technique, allowing all 3 aspects to grow in perfect harmony. As his body refines the spiritual energy, the heavy power of the laws begins to affect his soul. The marks upon his soul flicker and are quickly etched deeper, sharpening his understanding of the laws. With the support of his soul and body, his primordial spirit grows at a rapid pace. Compared to the commotion caused by the 3 pure ones, his cultivation isn't overly loud, yet it still manages to catch Hongjun's attention, which, of course, is no small thing. The sage's voice even falters for a brief moment as he looks toward Wu Tian with a hint of surprise. Deep down, Hongjun is puzzled. How could a member of the Wu clan achieve this? He felt a deep sense of confusion, finding that this Wu clansman named Wu Tian was shrouded in layers of mystery, like thick clouds. Even as a saint of the heavenly Tao, he found Wu Tian difficult to see through. Usually, the Wu clan focuses on baleful energy, which should repel pure spiritual energy. Yet Wu Tian's cultivation was proceeding with perfect smoothness. It made Hongjun wonder if this man was even a member of the Wu clan at all. With a mere thought, Hongjun continued his lecture while shifting his gaze toward Di Jiang and the other ancestral witches. Their reactions were exactly as he expected. They looked restless, as if sitting on needles. To be honest, if the gates of Zixiao Palace weren't closed, they probably would have bolted right then and there. Hongjun nodded slightly, thinking that this was how a normal Wu clansman should behave. Then, he turned his attention toward Xianming and Ho Tu. His gaze held a deeper meaning. Ho Tu was one thing. Though her early development of a primordial spirit was unexpected, it didn't deviate much from the Great Tao. But Xianming was a different story entirely. Thanks to some clever maneuvering, Xianming had secured a seat in Zixiao Palace for this lecture. As the lecture began, the prayer mat beneath her emitted a thick Taoist charm, which quickly began to suppress her heavy, baleful energy. Vast amounts of spiritual energy surged into her body. Instead of being eroded by her physical aura as before, it followed a mysterious cultivation path. The energy circulated through her, constantly condensing her soul power until the prototype of a primordial spirit was about to be born. Whether the heavenly Tao had changed or this was always meant to be, Hongjun sighed inwardly and closed his eyes to continue the lecture. 10,000 years passed in what felt like a heartbeat. Once Hongjun finished explaining the Daluo Golden Immortal Realm, he spoke with a calm tone. He explained that those at the peak of the Daluo realm could advance to the quasi-saint stage once their laws were perfected. Then, the lecture abruptly stopped. The Taoist charms and spiritual energy filling Zixiao Palace slowly dissipated. The crowd looked like they were waking from a dream, gradually returning to reality. They looked up at Hongjun with expressions of utter confusion. They wondered if it was truly over, as the secret to breaking through remained untold. Before anyone could speak, Hongjun's voice rang out again, announcing that the 10,000 years were up and this session had concluded. He told them the second lecture would occur in 3,000 years, where he would explain how to become a quasi-saint. Then, his figure began to fade. The cultivators felt an itch of curiosity they couldn't scratch, but they knew better than to press a sage. They could only bow in gratitude as he vanished. As the 2 young Taoist boys stood up, the great gates of Zixiao Palace slowly began to creak open, signaling the end of their stay. As the session finally came to an end, Zhu Rong couldn't help but stand up and let out a long, loud stretch. The other cultivators nearby shot the ancestral witches looks of pure annoyance. Deep down, they were frustrated that the sage Hongjun hadn't spoken just a bit longer, and they found this disrespectful attitude unbearable. If they weren't so terrified of the Wu clan, someone likely would have tried to intervene. Zhu Rong's gaze shifted, his face twisting into a look of utter disdain. He wondered what they were staring at and if they had a problem. After all, everyone who made it here was a powerful innate deity. He argued that since they each had their own great Tao, there was no need to abandon their roots just to listen to some path of the carefree immortal. Meanwhile, Wu Tian was busy steadying his own internal energy. Hearing Zhu Rong's bold words, Wu Tian looked over at him, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes. It seemed even a hothead like Zhu Rong was capable of such profound realizations. Usually, Zhu Rong was the most impatient of the group. Because of his volatile temper, he was the one who most frequently ended up on the receiving end of Di Zhang's disciplinary fists. Though he was still speaking without a filter, his words weren't entirely without merit. It seems Wu Tian's understanding of his brothers was still somewhat incomplete. In the grand scheme of things, the ancestral witches weren't actually brainless. But when supernatural powers face the will of heaven, even the best plans can crumble under the sage's calculations. Even if they wanted to resist, what could they really do? Figures like Di Jun and Fuxi were renowned for their vast wisdom, yet even they had met with misfortune. Just then, Zhu Rong suddenly shouted. He realized with a start that the two from the west had already slipped away. Wu Tian's train of thought was instantly broken as he turned his gaze toward the spot where Jia Yin and Zhuanti had been sitting. Sure enough, the space was empty. Looking toward the great gates of Zixiao Palace, we see only two streaks of golden light shooting off into the chaos, vanishing in the blink of an eye. The other cultivators still lingering in the hall frowned at the sight. Those who had been annoyed by Zhu Rong's loud mouth just a moment ago now found themselves hesitating to cast any more blame. If even Jia Yin and Zhuanti felt the need to flee, the rest of them certainly didn't want to provoke the witches. And who could blame them, really? To be honest, Wu Tian hadn't actually planned to do anything to them yet. But the way those two fled made it feel like a schoolyard rivalry where someone shouts, "Wait for me after class." He wondered why they bothered. Jia Yin and Zhuanti were protected by a great destiny. Even if the ancestral witches attacked now, they couldn't actually kill them. It would be better to wait until the karmic debt grew larger, than deliver a single, crushing blow that would leave them scarred for life. At that moment, Di Jiang stood up and glanced at the gates. He let out a soft snort, asking rhetorically if those two really thought they could run. If the witches truly wanted to teach them a lesson, they could simply chase them all the way back to the west. After all, those two couldn't stay away from their home forever. Di Jiang then turned to Wu Tian, suggesting they leave immediately to settle the score. Di Jiang's voice was so booming that everyone remaining in Zixiao Palace heard him, and their faces paled instantly. The more timid among them immediately lowered their heads. They hurried toward the exit, terrified of being noticed by the ancestral witches. These witches were simply too vengeful and unpredictable for any sane person to provoke. Wu Tian let out a wry smile and suggested they simply mark it down in their ledger for now, letting the two escape so they could settle the entire debt later as they needed to head back. He wanted to see how the younger generation was faring after being away for so long. Upon hearing this, the other ancestral witches suddenly felt a wave of urgency and agreed they should return immediately. Think about it. They had set out 3,000 years before the sermon even began, and the teaching itself lasted another 10,000. Though they had left many instructions, they couldn't help but worry. With their hearts full of concern for their home, the witches abandoned their plans for trouble and hurried toward the exit. Wu Tian, too, felt a certain restlessness deep down. Before leaving, he had instructed Jiu Feng and the other descendants to search Mount Buzhou for traces of the innate gourd vine, and he wondered if they had found anything yet. Just then, Zhen Yuanzi and Hong Yun quickly rose and approached Wu Tian with warm smiles, thanking him and the others for stepping in to help them earlier. They expressed their deepest gratitude, and Zhen Yuanzi mentioned that while he had little else to offer, his ginseng fruits were quite special. He invited them to his Wuzhuang temple. He suggested they sit, discuss the Tao, and share a taste. Since the witches had stood up for them, the two felt they owed a massive karmic debt and weren't quite sure how to repay it. The only thing they could truly offer was the ginseng fruit, so they extended the invitation. Wu Tian was actually quite interested, as this was one of the 10 great innate spiritual roots. It takes 3,000 years to flower, 3,000 to fruit, and another 3,000 to ripen, yielding only 30 fruits in a single cycle. A rare delicacy, to be sure. However, he didn't accept immediately. Instead, he smiled and promised they would do it next time. Di Jiang and the others were already eager to go home, and Wu Tian felt the same. Besides, the interval between the two sermons was short, only 3,000 years, and that included the time spent traveling through the chaos. So he politely declined for now. The ginseng fruits weren't going anywhere. After all, they could visit after the next sermon. Jin Yuanzi, having heard their earlier conversation, understood their situation perfectly. He smiled and noted that unlike the two of them, the witches had a massive clan to manage. He promised that he and his brother would keep this karmic debt in their hearts. He bid them farewell until the next sermon, promising that whenever they were free, he would sweep the paths of Wuzhuang Temple to welcome them. And with that, he bowed. After paying his respects to Wu Tian and the other ancestral witches, he prepared to depart. The witches might have had short tempers, but they weren't ungrateful and could recognize a sincere gesture. They accepted the kindness with smiles and nods. Once the two had left, Di Jiang chuckled, remarking that they seemed like decent fellows, even if their personalities were a bit soft. Wu Tian nodded in agreement. The ancestral witches looked down on their gentle nature, but that was only because the two hadn't been pushed to their limits yet. If things truly reached a breaking point, the world would see their true colors. In the original flow of destiny, Hong Yun would eventually choose to self-destruct his soul to take Kunping down with him. He would even shatter the primordial violet chi in the blast. One has to wonder if such a fierce hidden nature was something Zhen Yuanzi shared as well. We see that even with the Earth Book barrier connecting to the Great Desolate Land, these two were still quite naive. They hadn't yet grasped the fundamental logic of this world. Social graces are one thing, but they must be built upon a foundation of absolute strength. Wu Tian then turned his gaze toward the others as the crowd began to stir. At this moment, the Sanqing, Fuxi, and Nuwa all rose. When Wu Tian's eyes met theirs, Yuanshi let out a cold snort and looked away, while Fuxi and Nuwa offered polite smiles. Their eyes held a hint of faint curiosity. After nodding back to Fuxi and Nuwa, Wu Tian turned to his brothers and suggested it was time for them to depart as well. He followed the other ancestral witches toward the great gates of Zixiao Palace. As they passed the young attendant Hao Yin, Wu Tian paused for a moment to observe him. Hao Yin seemed a bit surprised by the attention, but he remained professional, bowing and wishing the Taoist a safe journey. Wu Tian nodded, a mischievous thought crossing his mind. He reached out and playfully ruffled Hao Yin's hair until it was a complete mess, chuckling as he told the little fellow to keep up the good work, for he had high hopes for him. Hao Yin looked puffed up with indignation, ready to protest such a lack of manners. But in the next heartbeat, his eyes caught a flash of bloody light right in front of him. 2 drops of ferocious beast essence blood landed before him, and not just any blood, but that of the Daluo Jingxian realm. Hao Yin quickly looked up in shock. However, he could only see Wu Tian's figure rapidly transforming into a streak of light, shooting off into the chaos. He couldn't help but mutter that this member of the Wu clan was very strange. Shaking his head, he glanced back into the depths of Zixiao Palace. Seeing that Hong Jun hadn't stepped out to stop the exchange, a smile finally spread across the boy's face. He quickly tucked the 2 drops of essence blood away, even taking a moment to signal to Yaoqi across from him. He assured her they would share them, 1 drop each. Meanwhile, back in the chaos, Di Jiang and Juin maintained a protective barrier as they traveled swiftly through the void, heading back toward the great desolate world. Di Jiang and Juin watched the others with bright, expectant eyes. They had held back their questions while surrounded by the crowd, but now they wanted to know what everyone had gained. The ancestral witches turned their gaze first to Wu Tian and then toward Xianming and Hetu. Seeing their anticipation, Wu Tian offered a small smile and decided to speak first. He explained that while Hongjuan's sermon on the immortal path differed from their own way, it provided immense value as a reference for their own cultivation. Every path has its own mysteries, yet their essence remains the same. Through Hongjuan's explanation of the immortal Tao, Wu Tian had finally confirmed this truth for himself. It all comes down to refining the mysteries of heaven and earth into one's own power, then perceiving and mastering the laws. To be honest, it's a universal struggle for power. Once the laws are perfected and woven into a Tao, one is essentially seizing the opportunities of the universe. Though his methods were different, the lessons were many. Combined with the blessing of the heavenly Tao's power during the sermon at Zixiao Palace, his harvest had been truly significant. And that, we realize, was only the beginning. Originally, after refining the ancestral dragon's blood and receiving help from the ancestral witches in the chaos, Wu Tian's comprehension of the laws had reached 20%. After hearing the sermon, that progress effectively doubled to 40%, while his physical strength surged directly into the mid-stage of the Daluo Jingxian realm. His primordial spirit had also reached the early Daluo stage. Di Jiang listened with a thoughtful expression, silently calculating the boy's current growth in his mind. However, the ancestral dragon grew impatient, telling him to skip the vague descriptions of realms, as rank doesn't always translate to true combat power. He wanted to know exactly how long Wu Tian could maintain the Panga True Body's blessing. Wu Tian couldn't help but laugh at the bluntness of it all. In the Great Desolate, battles aren't won by comparing ranks. They depend on physical power, divine abilities, and spiritual treasures, all of which affect the outcome. Naturally, the ancestral witches were most concerned with the Panga True Body, which explains the dragon's curiosity. Everyone turned to look at Wu Tian, waiting. After a brief mental calculation, he estimated he could hold it for about 15 minutes. Upon hearing this, the ancestral witch's eyes lit up instantly. Going from only being able to throw a single punch to maintaining the form for 15 minutes was a massive leap forward. They were, understandably, overjoyed. Wu Tian knew, however, that this was merely being enveloped by a phantom of the Panga True Body, rather than a true transformation. He was still far from that. He muttered to himself that he likely wouldn't be able to truly manifest the physical Panga True Body until he reached the Hunyuan Daluo Jingxian realm. There was no rush. Of course, cultivation takes time. For now, his role in the Wu clan was that of the strategist and military counselor. He still had plenty of time to practice. With 2 more sermons ahead, and each one potentially granting another 20% law comprehension, he had a plan. If he could continue this trend, he would reach at least 80% comprehension in the late Daluo stage by the time the third sermon concluded. Dijiang nodded with a satisfied smile, looking quite pleased with the progress. He had already completely dismissed the earlier tension back at Zhixiao Palace. After checking on Wu Tian, the group turned their collective gaze towards Xianming and Hetu. Hetu gave a soft laugh and decided to reveal her progress. She displayed her primordial spirit, which had surprisingly already reached the mid-stage of the Daluo Jingxian realm. She then looked at Wu Tian with deep gratitude. She softly confirmed that Wu Tian was right. Those seats truly held a great opportunity as the heavenly Tao's power flowed through them during the sermon. That power suppressed their innate baleful aura, allowing the primordial spirit to cultivate much faster. Hearing this, everyone suddenly turned to look at Xianming. Following Hetu's logic, they wondered if Xianming had also managed to cultivate a primordial spirit thanks to her seat. She did not keep them waiting. Xianming nodded slowly, confirming that she too had successfully cultivated a primordial spirit, a revelation that brought a wave of pleasant surprise to the entire group. With 3 members now possessing primordial spirits, the impact on the Wu clan would be immense, though it wasn't necessarily that this path was superior to their physical cultivation. Rather, having a primordial spirit allowed them to perceive the secrets of heaven, ensuring that even if their physical bodies fell, they could endure through their spirit. We see Xuanming's expression turn slightly odd as, with a single thought, she released her primordial spirit from her spiritual terrace, letting it float above her head. She noted quietly that her spirit's condition seemed unstable, prompting Wu Tian to lean in and inspect it closely, which, naturally, was the right thing to do. The 3-inch spirit looked exactly like Xianming, resembling a tiny, delicate figurine, though it possessed a much more ethereal and clear aura than her physical form. Wu Tian sensed that this spirit was currently only at the Jingxian realm, radiating the essence of Xuanming's laws while struggling against its surroundings. Outside the spirit, a heavy, baleful aura was constantly washing over it, slowly eroding its power and causing the small figure to appear quite dim and faded. It was then that Wu Tian realized the problem. Unlike Hetu, who possessed a massive amount of merit that formed a protective golden wheel around her spirit, Xianming had no such protection to block her own baleful aura from eroding her soul. To be honest, it was a miracle the spirit had lasted this long. Once they left the protection of the Zhixiao Palace mats, her innate aura had surged, beginning to wear down the very primordial spirit that shouldn't have existed. Dijiang fell into a deep silence, searching his mind for a solution, as he certainly didn't want to see Xuanming's hard-earned progress go to waste. Finally, he turned his gaze toward Wu Tian and asked what could be done. Wu Tian felt a stir in his heart, and a golden light suddenly erupted from his body. The Hongming measuring ruler descended instantly, hovering over Xuanming's primordial spirit and rotating slowly like the hands of a mystical clock. As it turned, it showered down dark yellow light, and the heavy, baleful aura that had been clouding the spirit was instantly pushed back and repelled. Xuanming's primordial spirit began to recover its vitality, no longer looking like a flickering flame on the verge of being extinguished by the wind. However, Xuanming's face fell as she recognized this was Wu Tian's own treasure. She reached up, intending to grab the ruler and return it to him immediately. Wu Tian quickly reached out and caught her cold palm, telling her not to worry, as he wasn't simply giving the treasure away forever. He explained that it was merely a temporary measure to suppress the aura, as they couldn't just stand by and watch her spirit be destroyed after such a rare opportunity. Xuanming's arms struggled slightly in his grip. In truth, her physical strength far surpassed his, but in this moment, she chose to remain still. In that moment, she didn't pull away, and a faint blush swept across her face. Wu Tian smiled, reassuring her that the problem was simple and he would eventually find her a solution. He suggested finding a magical treasure capable of suppressing her primordial spirit, ideally one that perfectly aligned with her own laws, so she could eventually return the Hongmeng ruler. Since the ancestral witches had shared their essence blood with him, he certainly wouldn't hesitate to lend a treasure in return, which, to be honest, was only fair. Xianming finally gave a small nod of agreement. Then, with a quiet effort, she pulled her hand from his and willed her primordial spirit to return to the depths of her body. The Hongmeng measuring ruler vanished along with the spirit, and only then did Xianming turn toward Wu Tian with a look that was, for some reason, quite difficult to read. We see Hetu's eyes darting between the two of them, a playful glint appearing as she remarked that Xianming clearly hadn't misjudged him after all her worrying. Xianming shot her a sharp, warning glare, but the other ancestral witches simply burst into laughter at the sight of the two sisters' silent exchange. Wu Tian, however, didn't notice the looks they were sharing. He had already fallen into deep thought, wondering which innate spiritual treasure would be the most suitable fit. The Wu clan currently possessed very few treasures, not because they were poor, but because they had never cared for such things, preferring their own physical strength. But that didn't matter. If a suitable treasure for Xianming existed, the ancestral witches were more than capable of simply going out and taking it by force. Wu Tian only needed to provide a clue, and Dijiang and the others would surely act without hesitation. Suddenly, a specific name from future legends crossed his mind. He remembered that in the stories of later generations, Xianming was worshipped as the goddess of water and the winter god of the north due to her unique laws. With that realization, his eyes lit up. If she was the god of the north, then the Northern Xianyuan water control flag, a top-tier innate treasure, was the perfect choice. It could control all the waters of the world and possessed incredible defensive power. Truly, there was nothing more fitting for her than such a legendary artifact. According to his knowledge, the flag should currently be in the hands of Kunpeng, though he wasn't entirely sure if the Great Bird had actually obtained it yet. Kunpeng himself had very few treasures and valued them immensely, which explains why, in the future, he would famously flee with the Hichu Luoshu during the Great War. Still, Wu Tian wasn't worried, as Kunpeng already owed him a favor. If the bird was willing to talk things through reasonably, that would be the best outcome for everyone. They could use the flag to settle the karma between them, but if Kunpeng refused, Wu Tian had no intention of being impartial. He was a man who stood by his friends. Since Xianming had been so kind to him, he would naturally take her side, even if it meant taking action against Kunpeng to secure the treasure for her. But as it turned out, he didn't have to wait long. Just as he was thinking of the name, Kunpeng himself suddenly appeared, as if summoned by the thought. While he was lost in thought, the expressions of Dijiang and Zhu Jiuyin suddenly shifted as the barriers surrounding the group came to a violent halt. Dijiang let out a furious roar, demanding to know who dared block the path of the Wu clan, and prepared to charge into the chaos to strike the figure ahead. Startled by the sudden tension, Wu Tian quickly peered forward and grabbed Dijiang to hold him back, realizing with a gasp that the figure was Kunpeng. There was no mistaking that solitary, black-robed silhouette. It was indeed Kunpeng, proving the old saying that if you speak of the devil, he shall appear. Wu Tian hadn't paid him much mind when leaving Zixiao Palace, assuming the bird had slipped away quietly, yet here he was, waiting in the middle of the chaos. His mind raced as he whispered to Dijiang, asking his elder brother not to attack and letting him go out to see what the visitor wanted. Dijiang frowned, his eyes filled with a protective worry, as Wu Tian had rarely faced danger alone without the strength of his brothers behind him. Wu Tian reassured him, noting that Kunpeng still owed them a great debt of karma and likely wasn't looking for trouble, before turning a bright smile toward Xianming. He remarked that Sister Xianming truly had incredible luck, as though a pillow had been delivered the moment she felt sleepy, and then he stepped out of the barrier. The ancestral witches were left staring at each other in confusion, especially Xianming, who blinked in bewilderment, wondering what Kunpeng could possibly have to do with her. We see that because Wu Tian hadn't shared his plan yet, the sudden appearance of Kunpeng seemed like a complete mystery to the rest of the clan. However, they had no time to dwell on it and watched Wu Tian closely, with Dijiang and Zhu Jiuyin remaining on high alert just in case. They silently resolved that if Kunpeng showed even a hint of malice, they would strike immediately and turn this patch of chaos into his final resting place. By now, Wu Tian had stepped fully into the void, his body radiating a faint, divine light that shimmered like a protective treasure against the darkness. The chaotic energy was pushed back by his presence as he smiled and asked Kunpeng if he had come seeking him for a specific reason. Kunpeng remained silent for a long moment before speaking softly, acknowledging that he owed Wu Tian a debt for the seat and asking how he wished to settle it. Wu Tian found this quite strange. He had heard Kunpeng was solitary, vengeful, and greedy, so why was he proactively trying to repay a favor? Reading his expression, Kunpeng stated coldly that he simply didn't like being in anyone's debt and preferred to keep his accounts clear and settled. Wu Tian chuckled, but he didn't mention the water control flag just yet, instead asking how Kunpeng intended to settle the matter or what he could offer the Wu clan. Kunpeng opened his mouth to respond, but for a moment, the great bird seemed unusually lost for words, as if he hadn't expected the question to be so direct. In terms of raw power, he couldn't match the 12 ancestral witches, and as for treasures, Kunpeng was notoriously lacking, being one of the most famous paupers in the primordial world. He was arguably even worse off than the two from the west who were always complaining, but he had his own way of thinking, especially after seeing the witches' earlier arrogance. Their domineering display had made Kunpeng incredibly wary, and he felt it was better to settle this debt sooner rather than later, as the trouble they could cause was no less than offending Zhuanti. After much deliberation, he had decided to come directly into the chaos to wait for them. We see that Wu Tian, realizing the bird's intent, decided not to beat around the bush and prepared to state his requirements. He gave a light chuckle and said that since Kunpeng was being so formal, he wouldn't be polite either, asking if the Northern Xianyuan water control flag was currently in his possession. Wu Tian suggested that if Kunpeng had it, he hoped to use that specific treasure to settle the karma between them once and for all. Kunpeng's expression shifted instantly, his eyes flashing with a sharp, icy coldness as he glared at Wu Tian, which immediately caused the ancestral witches to stand up in a defensive rush. They glared back at Kunpeng with clear hostility, but the great bird ignored them entirely, his face pale and shifting through a series of complex emotions for a long moment. Finally, he gritted his teeth and nodded, a look of deep pain crossing his face as he reluctantly waved his hand, releasing a streak of black light. A small, jet-black triangular flag appeared between them, radiating a heavy and profound Taoist aura that pushed the surrounding chaotic energy far away in an instant. Kunpeng practically spat out the words, "Take it," sounding as though he were speaking through clenched teeth, which was understandable given his limited inventory. Aside from this top-tier innate spiritual treasure, he only had his Kunpeng palace left, so giving this up felt like cutting a piece of his own heart out. But what choice did he have? He didn't want to owe Wu Tian any karma, and since he had come here himself, he couldn't very well lie or refuse to pay. Yet, something strange happened when he finally let it go. Despite the lingering reluctance in his heart, he suddenly felt a strange sense of relief, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He attributed this feeling to the settling of his karma, completely unaware that Wu Tian had been eyeing this treasure specifically for Xianming for quite some time. Had Kunpeng refused, the witches likely would have taken it by force, so this peaceful exchange actually averted a potential disaster for him. Wu Tian watched the small flag drift toward him. It was only about a foot long and covered in mysterious, profound runes that shimmered against the black fabric. Catching the water control flag, Wu Tian nodded with satisfaction and told Kunpeng that all their previous debts were now officially wiped clean. Seeing the lingering, longing gaze Kunpeng cast toward the flag, Wu Tian smiled again and, after a brief moment of thought, decided to offer a bit of advice. Wu Tian remarked that since Kunpeng was being so cooperative, he might as well share a secret. Kunpeng's seat was actually far more valuable than the Northern Xian Yuan water control flag. Of course, that depended on what the one above decided. Wu Tian pointed a finger upward, implying the seat represented a strand of primordial violet qi. That qi was the key to achieving sainthood, and by rights, Kunpeng should have received one for his seat, though Wu Tian admitted he couldn't guarantee it. After all, who knew if Hongjun might change his mind? Upon hearing this, Kunpeng's eyes flashed as a daring thought began to take root in his mind. A surge of wild joy washed over him. If the water control flag was a top-tier innate treasure, then an even more precious opportunity was truly unimaginable. Kunpeng opened his mouth to ask for more details, but Wu Tian simply smiled and shook his head, saying it couldn't be spoken of before turning back to the witches. Kunpeng stood in silence for a moment, gave a respectful bow to Wu Tian's retreating back, and vanished into the chaos. Once he was gone, Wu Tian turned to Xianming. He tucked the water control flag into Xuanming's hands, jokingly telling her that her cheat code had arrived, leaving the cold-faced goddess looking quite stunned. Wu Tian grinned, noting that just as he thought of this treasure, Kunpeng delivered it, proving that as Pangu's true successors, their luck was simply explosive. Gong Gong laughed, boasting that the luck of Father God's bloodline couldn't be bad, and Wu Tian didn't argue. The witches really were favored by fortune right now. Xianming tried to return the measuring ruler, but Wu Tian waved her off, telling her to refine the flag first while Hut had chimed in to support his schemes. Zhurong leaned in, wondering if he could get a soul-bound treasure too, but Dijiang rolled his eyes, reminding him he needed a primordial spirit first. Wu Tian nodded, suggesting the central Wuji apricot yellow flag would suit Huda best, prompting Zhurong to roll up his sleeves, ready to go, and snatch it. Wu Tian gave a wry smile, explaining that the 5 directional flags were likely in Hongjuan's pocket for now, causing Zhurong to quiet down immediately. Hudu waved them off, saying that by the second lecture, her primordial spirit would be strong enough that she wouldn't need such chess pieces anymore. Wu Tian stayed quiet, but his mind was racing. If Hongjun was too hard to rob, perhaps the other flags were easier targets to complete a supreme treasure. Combining the 5 flags into a great treasure was a monumental task, so he closed his eyes to meditate on space and time as they traveled through the void. After an unknown amount of time, a 7-colored flash appeared ahead, signaling their return to the primordial world, and Wu Tian stretched, glad to be home. He immediately thought of the innate gourd vine and asked if it had been found. Just then, Jufeng rushed toward them with a face full of excitement. After a quick bow to the ancestral witches, she looked at Wu Tian and nodded vigorously. It seemed they had found exactly what he had described. We find ourselves at the foot of Mount Buzhou, where Jufeng reports that Hui is currently guarding the innate gourd vine, waiting for the ancestral witches to return. Wu Tian is overjoyed and asks for the details. Jufeng explains that after the witches left for the Purple Heaven Palace, she and Hui began a search that lasted thousands of years. Mount Buzhou was simply too vast, and when the other great witches noticed their struggle, they asked what was happening. Since Wu Tian hadn't sworn them to secrecy, Jufeng decided to speak up. She told them about the search for the gourd vine, and the great witches all agreed that Wu Tian's business was their business, so they naturally decided to help. Every great witch joined in, scouring the base of the mountain like a net, until Quafu accidentally stumbled upon a valley hidden by an innate great array. Working together, they managed to crack a corner of the formation and confirmed it was indeed the site of the gourd vine, a revelation that makes Wu Tian pause. He is surprised to learn it was Quafu who found it. Remembering the legends of Quafu chasing the sun, he tells himself he must prevent those tragic events from repeating. Wu Tian smiles at Jiufeng, praising Quafu's great contribution and acknowledging everyone's hard work, promising that their efforts have been noted. Deep down, he wants to give them rewards immediately, but he realizes with a silent sigh that he has nothing suitable to give except his measuring ruler. Feeling a bit embarrassed by his lack of treasures, he tells them he will record their merits for now and reward them all later, which, to be honest, is a fair compromise. Jiufeng is delighted and thanks him profusely. She doesn't mind the delay, as simply being recognized by Wu Tian is enough to make her happy. At this point, Dijiang speaks up with curiosity, while Xianming and Huda knew of the gourd vine. The other witches are intrigued by Wu Tian's excitement. Wu Tian explains that this is one of the 10 great innate spiritual roots, and suddenly, the ancestral witches are all clamoring to go and see it together. Wu Tian has no reason to refuse, so he lets Jiufeng lead the way as the group uses their various powers to fly toward the hidden valley. Before they even land, the witches are peering down at the mountain peaks, only to find that the area looks completely ordinary until they follow Jiufeng down. At the foot of the mountain, they find the hidden valley where Hui, Quafu, and others are waiting. They immediately rush over to pay their respects. Wu Tian smiles and tells them to rise, giving Hui and Quafu a heavy, appreciative pat on the shoulder before turning his gaze toward the valley. The valley before him still looks perfectly normal, showing no signs of anything special, until Quafu runs forward and kicks the empty air in front of him. He turns back to Wu Tian with a grin, and as his strike lands, the scene before them shifts instantly, flashing with a brilliant 7-colored light. The invisible innate great array is revealed, uncovering a hidden space where a lush plant grows beside a lake shimmering with gathered spiritual energy. We see the 7-colored gourd vine climbing the mountain wall, its roots deep in the rock, bearing 7 small gourds of varying hues that leave the ancestral witches in awe. Zhurong lets out a cry of excitement and prepares to charge forward to break the innate great array, but Dijiang catches him just in time and pulls him back. Dijiang glares at him, telling him to show some restraint, before turning his gaze back to the vine and noting that it hasn't quite reached its full potential yet. He explains to Wu Tian that only the first 2 gourds are ripe. Breaking the formation now might interfere with the growth of the others, which would be a shame. Wu Tian notices this as well, remembering that in the original legends, the last 2 gourds weren't even ripe by the time of the 3rd sermon at the Purple Heaven Palace. Since he has found them much earlier than expected, he ponders for a moment before asking Dijiang if they could simply move the entire valley and the array into the Panga Hall. Leaving it out here makes him feel uneasy, and besides, the innate gourd vine represents more than just treasure. It is a powerful symbol of fertility and abundance. He wonders if planting it near the blood pool might help solve the Wu clan's reproduction issues, though he decides to keep that specific thought to himself for now. Dijiang nods and decides to give it a try, unleashing a surge of malevolent energy and spatial laws that begin to seep into the hidden valley. The power expands in all directions along the invisible lines of the innate great array, but after a few moments, Dijiang slowly shakes his head in disappointment. He explains that it's impossible. While it might work elsewhere, the space around Mount Buzhou is far too stable and rigid to be moved so easily. Furthermore, the vine likely needs the specific spiritual foundation of Mount Buzhou to ripen, and moving it might actually do more harm than good. Zhurong speaks up loudly, suggesting they just leave it here, since the vine doesn't have legs to run away and no one would dare touch a treasure guarded by the Wu clan. Wu Tian realizes this is their only option, and Hui immediately steps forward with the other great witches, vowing to stay and guard the site faithfully. Wu Tian smiles and agrees, acknowledging that breaking the array now would indeed be a waste of such a divine gift from nature. His goal is to seize the opportunity, not to cause destruction, but he tells himself he should at least leave a mark or refine the vine to prevent future complications. With the 12 ancestral witches backing him, he isn't afraid of a confrontation with the 3 pure ones, but being cautious is always the better path. He turns to Dijiang with a smile and asks if his brother can send him inside the valley without damaging the integrity of the innate great array. Dijiang laughs and agrees instantly, activating his spatial laws to wrap around Wu Tian, who feels a mysterious and profound shift in the space around him. In a flash of light, he finds himself standing directly in front of the innate gourd vine, realizing that seeing it up close is a far more breathtaking experience. We see him gasp in surprise as the gourd vine's countless tendrils wrap around the cliff like a cage, its ancient roots climbing until they nearly cover the entire mountain face. Every leaf is as green as pure jade, and as a gentle breeze passes, they sway with a shimmering light, clinking together like delicate jade pieces in the wind. 7 gourds hang there, each radiating a different light. We notice that only the first 2 are fully ripe, with the first one glowing with a deep purple, innate yang energy. In the original legends, Tai Ching would have taken this one, extracting its energy to refine the purple gold gourd, a treasure he used for his divine alchemy. The second gourd is black, carrying innate yin energy. It was destined for Tong Tian, though its essence was also meant to be extracted to help Tai Ching balance his Tao. After that, Tontian would have turned the empty shell into the water-fire gourd, which, to be perfectly honest, was still a formidable magical treasure in its own right. Wu Tian turns his gaze toward the other 5 gourds and observes that these unripe fruits are currently shimmering with the distinct lights of the innate 5 elements. He considers their future paths. The greenwood gourd was meant for Zhen Yuanzi, who would eventually pass it on to the reincarnated spirit of Hongyun. It would become the 5 grains gourd of Shinnon, while Hongyun's own red fire gourd was destined to be refined into the 99 scattered spirit gourd. The yellow earth gourd was to be claimed by Nuwa, who would craft it into the demon summoning banner, a tool capable of gathering 10,000 demons at once. The white metal gourd was meant for Di Jun, who, during the Great War, would use it to collect the spirits of the fallen Wu clan. This would eventually become the infamous immortal-slaying flying dagger, a weapon that gained legendary status once it reached the hands of Luya. Finally, the blue water gourd was destined for Yuan Shi, who would use it to collect the light of the sun, moon, and stars to create the famous 3-light holy water. Wu Tian mutters to himself that this vine should really be called the innate Yin-Yang 5 elements gourd vine, as he ponders the incredible legacy of these treasures. Even though some wouldn't have fully ripened in the original timeline, they all became famous artifacts, which tells you everything you need to know about their value. He can't help but smile, realizing that now, all of this belongs to him, including the vine itself, which would later play a massive role in the creation of humanity. Thinking of the creation of man, he remembers the 9 heavens breathing soil and quickly looks toward the base of the vine to see if it's there. Legend says the soil Nuwa used was found right here, and as he searches carefully, he indeed finds a mass of earth shimmering with 9-colored light. The heavy power of the earth element is constantly being absorbed by the vine, so Wu Tian sends out a surge of magic to reach for the soil. He takes a small piece and finds that, just like the legends promised, the soil grows back instantly to its original size, though he notices something else. We see that the 9 heavens breathing soil doesn't grow from nothing. It absorbs the world's spiritual essence, and he worries it might interfere with the vine's ripening. After taking another small piece, he stops collecting and begins to contemplate how to refine the gourd vine, or at least, how to leave his own mark upon it. After deep thought, he extends his soul power toward the vine, which seems to possess a spirit of its own as its countless leaves begin to rustle loudly. The 7 gourds light up instantly, unleashing the power of the innate Yin-Yang and 5 elements to wear down his spiritual energy and actively repel him. Feeling a bit speechless at this rejection, he stops his movements and, after a moment of silence, speaks softly to the vine, wondering if it can truly understand. He tells the innate gourd vine that meeting him today is its greatest stroke of luck, for the world rarely tolerates a being possessing all 5 elements. He warns that without this encounter, it would surely face a fate of being torn apart. The vine seems to understand, as its leaves suddenly stop shaking. The lights on the gourds dim, and a wave of profound sadness begins to emanate from the entire plant, as if it finally recognizes its own tragic future. In the Great Desolation, there are 10 great spiritual roots, yet not one has achieved the Tao in a perfect form. Even the great immortal Yang Mei was hollow. Zhen Yuanzi did not transform from the ginseng fruit tree's original body either. Others, like the fusang and laurel trees, are simply too powerful to change. Because they are so perfect, they are trapped on the sun and moon stars, unable to take human form. The gourd vine listens, sensing its own impending doom. Seeing its reaction, he smiles and reminds the vine that he is the true successor of Panga's providence, the one destined to hold the world's luck. He offers it a choice. If it recognizes him as master, he will do everything in his power to protect it. To prove his point, he activates his Panga true body. A gray phantom suddenly appears, overlapping with his physical form as the ancient aura of Pangu begins to spread out in every direction. The aura is so potent that even Mount Buzhou seems to resonate with it. Outside the formation, the ancestral witches are left wondering what on earth is happening. They had been confused when he started whispering to a plant, but now that he has summoned the Panga true body, the situation has become far more serious. The phantom flashes and vanishes as he returns to his normal state. He only wanted to prove his identity, not suppress the vine with brute force. Then, a delightful scene unfolds. The countless leaves shake as if nodding in agreement, and he feels a surge of genuine goodwill from the vine's spirit. The tender tip of the vine flies toward him like a green dragon, attempting to wrap around his arm, but his reflexes are a bit too fast for his own good. His 9-turn body reacts instinctively, bouncing the branch away with a surge of power, which leaves the poor gourd vine radiating a sense of deep grievance. Understanding its feelings, he quickly extends his arm again, suppressing his body's natural defensive reflexes while laughing and telling the gourd vine to try once more. The vine finally latches on, and as he feels his blood essence beginning to flow, the green vine is suddenly traced with crimson veins, as if blood vessels were growing within it. At that moment, a mysterious connection forms between him and the plant, allowing him to clearly sense its pure, tranquil intent, which makes the whole process feel quite worth it. He He realizes why the old blood-binding method is so popular. It truly is effective. As he pulls back his arm, the crimson color continues to spread across the entire vine. With a sudden flash of light, the blood-red hue vanishes, sinking deep into the vine's interior as the plant returns to its original, vibrant green appearance. His face turns pale for a moment from the sudden drain. He jokingly asks the vine if it took extra blood on purpose, just because it had the chance. It was, of course, just a lighthearted remark. Currently, the gourd vine possesses only a simple, childlike spirit. It seems he must wait for the 7 gourds to fully ripen before its intelligence truly matures. In the original flow of fate, this vine never had a chance. It was destined to be carved up by the 3 pure ones and others, with even its roots torn from the earth. But things are different now. Having found it early and claimed it as its master, and with the protection of the Wu clan, the vine can finally escape its tragic destiny. Through this connection, he can now influence even greater opportunities. As the bond solidifies, a massive wave of information begins to pour into his mind. Insights regarding the innate yin-yang and 5 elements bloom within him, and though it makes his head spin, he gains a much deeper understanding of the valley's formation. According to the vine's memories, this is the innate yin-yang 5 elements grand array, a powerful barrier that uses the vine itself as its core. The array grows stronger alongside the vine, and now that the plant has recognized him as master, the entire formation naturally falls under his control. With a single thought, the array shifts. 7 colored lights begin to shimmer across the invisible boundary, signaling its responsiveness to his will. The purple and black lights are the most prominent, while the 5-element rays are slightly dimmer. A moment later, the array slowly opens a passage. Seeing this, the ancestral witches walk into the valley and approach the gourd vine, marveling at the sheer spiritual power radiating from the miraculous plant. He smiles, telling them that the vine has officially recognized him, meaning no one can take it away now, a fact that makes the ancestral witches even happier. Zhu Rong, however, stares in utter disbelief, wondering how a few whispered words could actually convince a plant to listen. The vine's leaves shake in immediate protest. As Zhu Rong laughs sheepishly at the plant's reaction, he notes that all things have a spirit, and sincere communication can bridge almost any gap. He explains that while the vine can understand his words, the real reason it submitted was the Pangu aura he radiated. Growing on Mount Buzhou, the vine survives on the mountain's spiritual essence, and in its eyes, he is Pangu's true successor. Naturally, it was willing to recognize him as master. As Di Jiang and the others curiously examine the 7 small gourds, he makes a suggestion. He mentions his plan to share the gourds with his brothers once they fully ripen, though Di Jiang immediately waves the offer away. Refusing without a second thought, Di Jiang laughs, explaining he was merely marveling at the miracle of a plant containing the yin-yang and 5 elements. He insists that since he found this spiritual root himself, the brothers shouldn't take advantage of his good fortune, but he has other ideas. He reasons that once the gourds mature, they must be used rather than just hanging there as decorations, and he certainly doesn't need all 7. By sharing them, he can strengthen the ancestral witches, knowing that a stronger clan gives him much more security in this dangerous world. He jokingly adds that the stronger they are, the better they can protect him, which prompts a burst of hearty laughter from the group. They agree not to refuse further, deciding to wait for the harvest, while promising that even without the gourds, no one will bully him. Di Jiang laughs loudly as the other ancestral witches nod in agreement, but then Ho Tu looks over with a mischievous glint in her eyes. With eyes curved like crescent moons, she teases that no one can bully him, except for Sister Xianming, of course. He was left speechless, honestly. He always thought Ho Tu was the most steady and gentle of them all, but now she was becoming increasingly playful and full of witty remarks. Watching the 2 sisters bicker, he gives a wry smile and holds up the 9 heaven soil to catch Ho Tu's attention. The 2 stop their playing, and as Ho Tu senses the immense power within the soil, her eyes widen in pure astonishment. He nods with a smile, handing half of the 9 heaven soil to her, while explaining the mysterious properties of this divine earth. He suggests she use the earth laws within the soil to strengthen her soul, promising that it will yield twice the result with half the effort. Since the treasure is a perfect match for her and possesses the power of endless growth, Ho Tu accepts it without further hesitation. Seeing this, Xianming seizes the opportunity to tease her back, noting with a cold but playful smirk how attentive he is to her needs. She remarks that he seems to bring Ho Tu anything she can use, and Ho Tu simply smiles as she tucks the divine soil away. She laughs, noting that since they lead the Ho Tu tribe together, it's only natural. He simply smiles wryly at the bickering pair before turning his attention back to Di Jiang and the others. We see him address Di Jiang, explaining his plan to stay here for a while to meditate on the yin-yang and 5 elements laws within the vine. He suggests they head back to the tribe first and call for him when it's time to depart, but as he finishes, the ancestral witches exchange rather strange looks. After a moment of hesitation, Di Jiang scratches his head with a wry smile, admitting that perhaps they shouldn't go to the next lecture after all. Zhu Rong quickly chimes in, explaining that since they cultivate using baleful energy, the dense spiritual aura of the Purple Cloud Palace makes them feel quite restless. It's a bit of an absurd sight. Di Jiang, the eldest brother who usually makes all the decisions, now wearing a pleading, helpful smile on his face. He cautiously suggests that Wu Tian should go with Xianming and Ho Tu while the rest stay behind, promising to ambush anyone who dares cause them trouble. He can only laugh. When even the authoritative Di Jiang takes on such a humble tone, there really isn't much left for him to say, is there? Besides, after the powerful display the ancestral witches made at the palace previously, it's unlikely anyone would be foolish enough to provoke the three of them. He agrees that if they don't want to go, they shouldn't, which causes the group to sigh in relief as Di Jiang instantly regains his usual commanding presence. Di Jiang laughs, assuring him that even without the lectures, they won't be wasting their time and will continue to progress in their own cultivation. They will focus on mastering their own laws and tempering their physical bodies, a task Di Jiang approaches with immense confidence. Then, the usually quiet Zhu Juyin speaks up. He notes with a smile that while the other great powers of the wilderness are busy listening to the Tao, it's the perfect time for them to focus on their own development. He adds that they must also prioritize the 12 heaven-slaying formation he mentioned, showing just how much weight they now give to his every suggestion. The ancestral witches have clearly taken his words to heart, and perfecting that formation has now become their absolute top priority. Di Jiang's smile widens as he considers the future of their people. He declares that since they are establishing the Wu clan, they must do it properly and with the recognition it deserves. The Wu clan. He reasons that in establishing the clan, they must naturally follow the proper path. They must announce their presence to Father Pangu, for though the Wu clan was destined to grow powerful, they needed to formally claim their title before the world. We see him reflecting on how the ancestral witches only established the Wu clan after June and the others formed the Demon clan, but now, he plans to seize the initiative. By establishing the clan first, they could claim massive merit, perhaps even stirring the lingering will of Father Pangu to grant them a divine blessing. He even considers a clever trick for the oath, addressing the Great Tao directly instead of just the Heavenly Tao, hoping the Great Tao might show favor for Pangu's sake. If the Great Tao truly descends and bestows its merit, the ancestral witches would profit immensely, allowing their other grand schemes to fall perfectly into place. For instance, he could arrange for Xianming to become the winter goddess and Zhu Rong the fire god, positions of true power born of heaven and earth. These innate deities are far superior to those who rely on the incense and prayers of mortals, though he decides to keep these finer details to himself for now. He plans to refine the strategy with them after the second lecture, simply telling his brothers that the matter is settled and they should prepare in advance. He suggests that once he, Xianming, and Sister Ho Tu return from the palace, they will formally announce the birth of the Wu clan to Father Pangu. Di Jiang and the others nod in agreement before taking their leave. Even Xianming and Ho Tu must return to their tribes for a short while. They need to check on the young warriors of the Wu clan, but Ho Tu promises with a smile that they will rejoin him once their affairs are settled. When the time is right, they will depart directly from here. Once the ancestral witches leave, he closes the innate formation and begins his solitary cultivation. He immerses his consciousness into the innate gourd vine, seeking to understand the laws of yin-yang and the 5 elements woven deep within its fibers. While these laws seem to overlap with the powers of the ancestral witches he carries, we learn that they are, in fact, quite different in nature. The laws of the wilderness are often extreme and personal, like Zhu Rong's fire, which is pure, violent aggression, but the vine's laws are far more refined. To his surprise, as he meditates, he finds himself absorbing a wealth of spiritual nourishment, deepening the marks of the laws upon his very soul. But the most significant change isn't the depth of his power, it's the strange new patterns appearing around the faint figure formed by his 12 laws. The innate gourd vine begins to coil into a circle like a floral wreath, and the 7 gourds manifest with startling clarity within his mind's eye. Midway through his training, Xianming and Ho Tu return from their tribal duties to join him, and they continue their cultivation together for an unknown time. Eventually, he is gently awakened by Ho Tu, who informs him with a soft smile that it is finally time for them to begin their journey. The first time, they left 3,000 years early, but now that the path is familiar, they won't need as much time, though the journey through chaos remains long. He nods slowly, acknowledging that the journey will take time, and begins to steady his magical power after this latest period of intense cultivation. While his physical growth was negligible, his soul's strength increased immensely, finally reaching a balance with his body at the mid-stage of the great golden immortal realm. He can't help but mutter that he is still a bit lacking, but hearing this, Ho Tu smiles and reminds him that he was the last to be born. She points out that mastering the laws through the ancestral blood in such a short time is a feat he should be satisfied with, though he isn't quite convinced. It isn't that he is ungrateful, but he feels the conflict between the Demon and Wu clans drawing closer with every lecture at the Purple Cloud Palace. He worries that others, like Tai Ching of the 3 Pure Ones, might already be at the peak of their realm, just waiting for Hong Jun's next lesson to ascend. Naturally, he has no desire to be suppressed by the three pure ones after knowing the future, but he simply smiles and doesn't argue with his sisters. He tells the two ancestral witches it is time to depart so they don't miss the lecture, and both Xianming and Ho-Tu nod in agreement. Xianming returns the primordial measuring heaven ruler to him, and then she and Ho-Tu join forces to shield him as they fly toward the edge of the wilderness. They head toward the purple cloud palace within the chaos. During the first trip, Di Jiang and Zhu Jiuyin did the heavy lifting while he simply enjoyed the ride. This second journey is much the same, as Xianming and Ho-Tu take on the burden of travel without a second thought, leaving him to play the role of the protected younger brother. To be honest, being the younger brother has its perks, as he has 10 brothers and 2 sisters who always stand in front of him and share every benefit. This time, instead of cultivating, he chats happily with his sisters, and after putting away his magical ruler, he turns to Xianming with a question. He asks if she has fully refined the northern Xianming water control flag, to which she gives a slight, somewhat hesitant nod. She admits it isn't fully refined yet, though it can now block the corrosive aura, and a trace of frustration flickers across her face. While the flag protects her, the sheer pressure of her powerful physical body makes the cultivation of her soul agonizingly slow. Because of this, she cannot recklessly devour the malevolent aura to temper her body like Di Jiang and the others do, as a stronger body only further suppresses her soul. He quickly tries to comfort her, noting that even Ho-Tu isn't worried, and promises that once her soul's strength matures, her physical power will explode as well. He then reminds Xianming to seize the opportunity during the next 2 lectures to increase her soul's power as much as possible. Xianming gives him a playful look, teasing that he's starting to sound like the older sister since he's already told her this once before. Xianming teases him, asking if she really needs him to worry so much, but deep down, she is moved by his concern despite her blunt nature. She is often too shy to express it, much like before, when she'd show care by nearly beating him to death, and he can only chuckle at the memory. He then turns to Ho-Tu, who smiles warmly and mentions how the 9 heaven soil he gave her has allowed her to master the earth laws. She thanks him sincerely, but he quickly waves it off. Originally, his only plan was to strengthen his bond with the ancestral witches. Specifically, he wanted to stay close to Ho-Tu to ensure his own safety in the wilderness, but after living with them, those calculating thoughts faded. Now, he truly hopes the ancestral witches can find a better end and escape their tragic fates. They may be hot-tempered, but they are kind to him. They never show their violent side to their younger brother, offering him only their simplest, most cheerful selves, which is quite a contrast, really. Moved by their sincerity and thinking of their original destinies, he tells his sisters not to worry, promising to help them achieve the Tao. Xianming and Ho-Tu are surprised. They can feel the absolute sincerity in his voice, even if they don't understand why he said it so suddenly. After a brief pause, Ho-Tu laughs, reminding him that since he's always asking for their protection, they will surely shield him once they ascend. She promises that no one in the wilderness will bully him, and he laughs heartily as the 3 of them use their past experience to navigate the chaos. Following their inner intuition, they soon arrive at the Purple Cloud Palace, and as the great gates swing open, the 3 of them quickly enter. Perhaps because he gave the beast blood to Hao Tian and Yao Qi last time, the 2 usually solemn young Taoists actually greet them with smiles. They give him a respectful bow, which he returns with a grin before making his way toward the very front of the Great Hall. It is only then that we see they are actually quite late. The front seats are mostly filled, leaving only the spots for the ancestral witches vacant. The crowd watches them with obvious confusion, wondering why only 3 of them appeared this time, and where the other ancestral witches could be. Once he takes his seat, Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun lean in immediately, with Hong Yun asking curiously where Di Jiang and the others are. He smiles and explains that his brothers have other matters to attend to. He certainly can't tell them that his siblings simply didn't want to come to class. That would be rather embarrassing, wouldn't it? Hearing this, Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun are stunned, their faces filled with utter disbelief. Their expressions seem to ask what could possibly be more important than this lecture, which is set to cover the path to the Saint Realm. The others are sensible enough to take the hint. Seeing that he has no intention of saying more, Hong Yun stops asking and simply smiles. He remarks that it's just as well, as our protagonist can simply explain the lecture to his brothers later, making it unnecessary for everyone to attend. At that moment, Kuan Peng turns around from the front row, forcing a smile that looks even more awkward than his usual scowl as he nods toward him. This sudden friendliness from the notoriously antisocial Kuan Peng leaves Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun stunned, their eyes filled with curiosity and silent questions. Kuan Peng's strange change in behavior doesn't escape the notice of Di Jun and Tai Yi. While Di Jun remains calm, Tai Yi's brow furrows in annoyance. Tai Yi grumbles to his brother that Kuan Peng is being ungrateful, recalling how coldly he treated them when they offered him a grand opportunity. He whispers to Di Jun, his voice dripping with indignation, that Kuan Peng's respect for Wu Tian is a direct insult to their own status. Jun calmly tells him to suppress his anger, reminding him that they are in the Zixiao Palace and should focus entirely on the upcoming lecture. Despite his calm words, Jun's gaze shifts toward Fu Xing and Nu Hua, his mind already beginning to whirl with new, private calculations. As the great doors of the Zixiao Palace slowly creak shut, Hong Jun's figure appears at the front as if by magic, just as he did before. His gaze sweeps across the assembled crowd, and we see a flicker of recognition when he notices the missing ancestral witches. According to Hong Jun's calculations of the heavenly fate, Di Jiang and the others should have missed this entirely, yet their absence still brings a certain relief. Even with these thoughts, Hong Jun's expression remains as cold and indifferent as ever, his eyes barely lingering on any single person. After scanning the hall one last time, he announces the start of the second lecture, and the air immediately begins to hum with divine energy. The Taoist rhythm begins to flow through the palace once more, and everyone leans in eagerly, desperate not to miss a single syllable. The previous lecture had ended on a cliffhanger, leaving them all in a state of agonizing anticipation for the last 3,000 years. For figures like the Sanqing, Fu Xing, Nu Hua, and the brothers Di Jun and Tai Yi, who were born with innate cultivation, the stakes are high. While the first lecture was enlightening, what they truly crave is the secret to reaching the Saint Realm and mastering the ultimate Tao. As Hong Jun begins his slow, rhythmic narration, the faces in the crowd shift, some with sudden realization, others with pure, ecstatic joy. Deep down, our protagonist feels a sense of quiet satisfaction. Hong Jun's words are confirming the very theories he had already begun to piece together. Deep down, Wu Tian begins to understand why the ancestral witches were destined to perish and return to the heavens in the original timeline. The path of cultivation usually requires refining the body and absorbing worldly essence to strengthen one's power before attempting to comprehend the higher laws. The ancestral witches followed a similar logic, with one major difference. They started with an incredibly high baseline, naturally controlling a fundamental law from birth. However, as they approached the realm of the primordial golden immortal, the path of the Wu clan and the immortal Tao begin to drift poles apart. While the immortal Tao weaves multiple laws together to reach enlightenment, the Wu clan chooses to follow a single, lonely path to the very end. It isn't a matter of right or wrong. In fact, the Wu clan's singular focus often makes them stronger, but their journey is far more treacherous. Under the current heavenly Tao, it is practically impossible for them to reach perfection. No matter how hard they train, they remain stuck at the peak. They can never take that final step, as the more fundamental and powerful a law is, the more difficult it becomes to truly master it. Take Zhang's control over space, for example. Imagine the sheer impossibility of one being trying to command every single aspect of spatial reality. If he succeeded, the heavenly Tao itself would lose control over space, which is exactly why these calculations were set against them from the start. The heavenly Tao views the Wu clan as a major internal threat, fearing that their total mastery of a law would leave the heavens vulnerable and scarred. Naturally, the heavens are hostile toward them. After all, everyone wants to be the master of their own destiny, even the universe itself. And this, as it turns out, is the underlying logic behind why the ancestral witches were always meant to be sacrificed. Their deaths would allow their powerful laws to return to the source. Wu Tian sighs inwardly, already wondering how he might change this grim fate. Recalling various legends from the future, a plan begins to take shape in his mind, allowing him to stop worrying and focus on the lecture. As Hong Jun continues his explanation within the Zixiao Palace, we see the audience split into two very different groups. Those who can keep up are beaming with sudden realizations, while the weaker cultivators look utterly miserable, unable to grasp a single word. The concepts are so profound and mysterious that even those who try to memorize the words for later find they simply cannot hold on to them. The knowledge vanishes like a reflection in the water the moment it enters their minds, yet Wu Tian finds himself following along perfectly. Though he practices the 9 revolutions, the way the 12 laws weave into the Panga true body provides him with a direct path to the heavens. He realizes that by engraving these laws, he can strengthen the Panga true body. Currently, he can only manifest a faint shadow of that ancient power. If he could one day truly transform into the Panga true body, he would reach the peak of the primordial realm, a goal he pursues relentlessly during this lecture. On one hand, he listens to the secrets of the quasi-saint realm, while on the other, he greedily devours the spiritual energy within the Zixiao Palace. The power of the laws constantly tempers his physical body and soul, pushing his cultivation toward higher realms with every passing second. It is at this moment that Hong Jun, whose eyes had been half closed, slowly opens them to gaze upon the gathered crowd with a deep, inscrutable look. Despite his magnificent explanation and the audience's rapt attention, very few have actually committed to switching their path to the immortal Tao. The innate deities Hong Jun favors most have their own pride. They have no intention of abandoning their unique paths for his new system. Take the Sanqing, for instance, born from the 3 parts of Pangu's soul. Previously, they encountered the 24-petaled lotus of creation at Mount Kunlun. The heavenly Tao could not tolerate the lotus, so it split into 3 treasures: the Tai Whisk, the Rui Scepter, and the Qingping Sword. These represent their respective paths of alchemy, fortune, and swordsmanship. Naturally, they won't simply surrender their destiny to Hong Jun's influence. Thus, even though Tai Ching is powerful enough to break through to the quasi-saint realm right now using the immortal Tao methods, he chooses not to. He merely observes the mysteries of the immortal Tao without any intent to advance, while Wu Tian, Xian Ming, and Ho Tu are equally focused elsewhere. They use the unique environment of the Zixiao Palace and the falling Taoist luck to strengthen themselves, ignoring the actual teachings entirely. Hong Jun never expected much from the stubborn Wu clan, especially Ho Tu, who is destined for a different fate and cannot follow the immortal Tao. The great sage can't help but frown slightly. He has set the stage so carefully, yet it seems not a single fish is biting his hook. As the lecture nears its end and the methods for reaching the quasi-saint realm are almost fully revealed, Hong Jun finally begins to lose his composure. Although the immortal Tao is destined to flourish under the heavenly Tao, he realizes that even destiny sometimes needs a little push. His gaze shifts toward Duke Dong and Queen Mother Shi, 2 deities born from the primal yin and yang energies of the universe. These 2 practice at Penglai Island and West Kunlun. With a single thought, Hong Jun sends an invisible ripple of influence toward Duke Dong. While deep in meditation on the immortal Tao, Duke Dong suddenly feels a strange stirring in his heart as the lecture continues. As Hong Jun explains the methods of the immortal Tao, Duke Dong feels the immense difficulty of reaching enlightenment through the laws of the 5 elements and yin and yang. The great Tao of heaven and earth is powerful, but the path is grueling. He wonders why he should keep struggling down such a narrow, frustrating road of laws. With these thoughts swirling, Duke Dong looks up at Hong Jun, realizing the ready-made immortal Tao is right before him, guided by a saint's own teachings. The path ahead seems clear and unobstructed, so he asks himself why he should continue to suffer, and once that thought takes root, there is no stopping it. Suddenly, a commotion erupts within Zixiao Palace as endless spiritual energy surges toward Duke Dong, using his innate yang energy as a foundation. His internal power begins to transform according to the immortal Tao techniques, and as his aura spreads, the resonance of yin and yang forces Queen Mother Shi's power to stir. Her energy begins to rotate completely out of her control. She can only curse him silently for being such a fool before she is forced to follow suit. She focuses her mind, using her insights to convert her cultivation into the immortal Tao. A moment later, the ethereal chanting from Hong Jun finally falls silent. The great sage gazes down with an utterly indifferent expression, his eyes resting upon Duke Dong and Queen Mother Shi as they complete their transformation. To the observers, nothing seems amiss. In fact, given the legends, this scene feels perfectly natural, as these 2 were always meant to be pillars of the immortal Tao. After a short while, the 2 finish their meditation, their entire cultivation now radiating the distinct, refined aura of the immortal path. Their strength surges into the late stages of the great zenith golden immortal realm, and Duke Dong feels as though his future cultivation will face no major obstacles. He believes that with a little more time, breaking through to the quasi-saint realm will be easy, and naturally, a wide smile spreads across his face. Queen Mother Shi, however, having been forced into this transition, doesn't look nearly as pleased as her counterpart. She understands all too well that while the immortal Tao is a path, she is now walking in someone else's footsteps, forever confined by their design. It is then that Hong Jun speaks, declaring that since they are born of yin and yang and have joined his Tao, they shall lead all male and female immortals. As his words fall, the power of the heavenly Tao surges through the palace. This title is not just a name, but a divine position of immense authority. Their providence swells instantly under the blessing of the heavenly Tao, and their personal strength begins to tremble with newfound potential. They seem poised to reach the very peak of their realm, but Hong Jun isn't finished yet. It seems he intends to make an example of his generosity. After bestowing their divine titles, he goes a step further and grants them several powerful Dharma treasures, starting with Duke Dong. The most precious gift Duke Dong receives is the dragon head cane, a treasure said to have been used by Hong Jun himself before his enlightenment, symbolizing his status as the leader of all male immortals. Queen Mother Shi fares even better, receiving the Western Pure Cloud Banner, a top-tier innate spiritual treasure, which is truly a remarkable stroke of luck. This treasure is granted to her for protection, along with an innate water peach tree to stabilize her providence, and as we see, these gifts are quite substantial. The resentment she felt earlier mostly vanishes as she quietly bows alongside Duke Dong, both of them offering their thanks to the saint in unison. Duke Dong is practically beaming. He is not only satisfied with his choice, but has realized that being the leader of male immortals carries immense weight. With the dragon head cane in hand, he wonders if he has effectively become the spokesperson for the immortal Tao in the prehistoric world. A tempting thought, indeed. Countless ideas swirl in his mind before he speaks up again, assuring Saint Hong Jun that they will cultivate diligently and spread the teachings of the immortal Tao. He vows to ensure the prosperity of their path, while the others watching this scene begin to harbor their own complicated thoughts. Those with less resolve find themselves wishing they had stepped forward first, imagining that these divine positions and treasures could have been theirs. Others frown in contemplation, and just as the atmosphere begins to shift, Dijun suddenly stands up to address the saint. He bows respectfully and asks a bold question. Is the immortal Tao the only path to reaching enlightenment and becoming a saint in this vast world? The crowd is startled, their eyes gleaming with anticipation, as Dijun has voiced the very doubt lingering in all of their hearts. Even if Dijun hadn't stood up, someone else surely would have. Hongjun's gaze remains deep and inscrutable as he calmly replies that this is not the case. He explains that there are 3,000 great Daos that lead to sainthood, not just the immortal path, and reveals a treasure known as the Jade Butterfly of Creation. This artifact records the many paths of the prehistoric world, and he invites those with fate on their side to perceive them as the butterfly begins to glow with infinite light. Suddenly, a vision appears where countless Dao cycle through life and death, and with a sudden tremor, these Dao marks begin to fly through the palace. They scatter like a sky full of dazzling stars, and the seated cultivators immediately release their spiritual light to chase after the 3,000 paths. They use their soul power to follow their intuition, searching for the specific Tao that best suits their own nature and cultivation. Even our protagonist is no exception. There is no time to worry about Queen Mother, as he focuses his mind and reaches out with his soul power. He quickly captures a shimmering mark and begins to sense its mysteries. It is the Tao of the physical body, which explains his natural affinity for it. The connection he feels is intense, yet he is surprised to find that the principles within this mark are incredibly fragmented, and he soon finishes contemplating them. The mark flies back into the void, which makes sense. The Jade Butterfly of Creation is a supreme treasure, but it couldn't possibly record all 3,000 Daos perfectly. That would be far too heaven-defying, wouldn't it? Being able to etch even a fragmented mark is quite a feat, so he wastes no time following his soul's intuition once more. He reaches out toward the many marks and quickly captures another. This one is the Tao of the world, which involves opening a world within oneself and constantly perfecting it. This path is somewhat similar to Panga's creation of heaven and earth, though Panga had the strength to achieve a top-tier world in the chaos in a single step. In contrast, this Tao of the world relies on a slow promotion. Not one to be picky, he seizes the moment to etch this path into his own soul. Whether he chooses to practice it or not, it serves as a valuable foundation. But just as he finishes his contemplation and prepares to reach out again, Hongjun's voice rings out calmly, announcing that time is up and the second sermon has officially come to an end. In 3,000 years, he will deliver the final sermon to explain the method of becoming a saint. As his voice fades, the Jade Butterfly of Creation trembles. Suddenly, the countless mysterious lights and Tao marks in the void vanish in an instant, flying back to Hongjun's side. The crowd is filled with a sense of lingering reluctance, but then Duke Dong, struck by a sudden thought, speaks up with a bright, knowing smile. The great sage Hongjun had guided them through the ancient ways, and now, in an act of selfless devotion, he shared the 3,000 paths of the great Tao with all of prehistoric creation. He declares that the saint should be known as the ancestor of all Daos, and before anyone can even react, Duke Dong bows deeply in gratitude. He thanks the Tao ancestor for his compassion in educating all living beings, leaving the rest of the crowd completely stunned by such blatant flattery. They wonder how Saint Hongjun suddenly became Tao ancestor Hongjun. If all paths truly originated from him, the title might fit, but is that actually the case? Naturally, it isn't. Not only are the records in the Jade Butterfly incomplete, but many of the innate deities present already possess their own unique paths. Their power didn't come from Hongjun at all, so why call him the Tao ancestor? Yet, Duke Dong has already used the title here in the Zixiao Palace. Having accepted the favor of the sermon, what else can the others do? It's not as if they can jump up and shout that Hongjun doesn't deserve the name. After a moment of silence, other voices finally begin to echo through the palace as everyone feels forced to follow Duke Dong's lead. They all offer their thanks to Tao ancestor Hongjun. Our protagonist and his two companions remain silent, though he chooses not to cause a scene. We see the crowd looking on, knowing their heritage comes from the great Pangu, not Hongjun. Naturally, they don't truly accept him as the Tao ancestor. Hongjun doesn't seem to mind, a faint smile playing on his lips as he focuses on the changes within himself while the crowd's collective voice echoes. As the title Tao ancestor settles, a surge of immense charm and rhythm descends upon him, causing the Jade Butterfly to spin rapidly as his heavenly authority grows. Hongjun chuckles softly, remarking that there is no need for such ceremony, though it is only right. He then gives a small nod toward Duke Dong. That single nod makes Duke Dong feel as though his heart is filled with honey, his smile brightening even further before Hongjun finally makes his exit. The sermon has ended, and in 3,000 years, the Zixiao Palace will open again to explain the sacred method of becoming a saint. Just like last time, Hong Jun leaves them on a cliffhanger, leaving the listeners feeling restless as his figure vanishes without a trace. The gates of Zixiao Palace swing open once more, just as they did before, but this time things are different now that Hong Jun holds the title of Dao Ancestor. With his authority over the heavenly Dao solidified, Duke Dong and Queen Mother Shi have also received divine positions, granting them power over all immortals. Di Jun narrows his eyes, quietly observing Duke Dong, while other practitioners are already flocking toward the Duke with words of high praise. They offer their congratulations, noting that since the Dao Ancestor personally appointed him to lead the prehistoric immortal path, his future is truly glorious. Duke Dong was originally known as Lord Mu because of his connection to the heaven-reaching sword wood, one of the 10 great innate spiritual roots. This is why the Dao Ancestor gave him a spiritual root, just as he gave Queen Mother Shi an innate peach tree. Now, Duke Dong basks in the flattery. He feels a bit lightheaded from the praise, but he suppresses his pride, maintaining a humble appearance as he smiles and bows to his fellow cultivators. He tells them that since the Dao Ancestor granted him this position, he cannot remain idle, and plans to follow the saint's example once he returns to Penglai. He invites them all to join him at Penglai to discuss the immortal path, and several people immediately nod, eager to hear Lord Mu's insights. Duke Dong's heart swells with satisfaction, and with a sudden thought, he quickly turns his gaze toward Queen Mother Shi. Since they are the respective heads of the male and female immortals, he feels he shouldn't be performing this solo, but the Queen Mother is already gone. Duke Dong looks toward the palace gates, just in time to see her silhouette disappearing into the void of chaos beyond. He calls out to her in surprise, but realizing his surroundings, he quickly turns back to apologize to those still standing beside him. He rushes off to follow her, and seeing this display, Dijun can't help but let out a contemptuous laugh before turning his gaze away from Duke Dong with a soft snort. From his words and actions, Dijun has clearly seen that after gaining the title of head of the male immortals, Duke Dong's ambition has begun to surface. In Dijun's mind, the so-called head of male immortals is nothing more than a watchdog. He then turns his attention toward Fuxi and Nuwa. He ponders for a moment before walking toward Fuxi and Nuwa with a smile, while our own gaze naturally shifts from Queen Mother Shi's back toward Nuwa as well. Just as we look over, he feels a tap on his arm and turns to find Xianming's cold, peerlessly beautiful face right in front of him, staring intently. She asks him directly who is more beautiful, Queen Mother Shi or Nuwa, leaving him momentarily stunned, which, to be honest, is a perfectly reasonable reaction. He can hardly believe such words came from the icy lips of Xianming. As he stares at her, a flicker of flustered panic crosses her face. She quickly composes herself, asking if she said something wrong, noting that ever since Hong Jun finished his sermon, he hasn't stopped staring at Queen Mother Shi. She points out that he only looked away once the Queen Mother left Zixiao Palace, only to immediately fix his eyes on Nuwa without a second's pause. Deep down, he feels completely wronged by this massive misunderstanding. He was only watching Queen Mother Shi because she had just received the Western Plain White Cloud flag. He had been thinking about how to obtain the 5 innate elemental flags, so naturally, he had to study it, though, of course, the Queen Mother is indeed quite beautiful. Every innate deity in the prehistoric world tends toward perfection while maintaining unique traits, and the Queen Mother's air of elegance and grace is undeniable. The faint touch of lethargy in her expression truly appeals to him, but that wasn't the point. As for Nuwa, he was simply watching Dijun approach her and Fuxi. According to the original timeline, this should be the moment when Dijun, Tai, Fuxi, and Nuwa join forces to create the Demon Clan. Naturally, he needs to pay close attention, and after he quietly explains this through a voice transmission, Xianming's expression finally softens as she asks if it's true. She looks toward Dijun's group and asks what they should do next. In her mind, a demon clan that hasn't even fully formed yet poses no real danger. He takes one last look at the 4 of them and suggests they head back immediately, reminding her that the plans they discussed with their brothers must be accelerated. He insists they cannot let others get ahead of them and stands up to leave, just as Zhen Yuanzi and Hong Yun hurriedly approach the group. It seems they want to invite him to the Wuzhuang Temple to discuss the Tao and taste the ginseng fruit, but he simply doesn't have the time for such pleasantries. He beats them to the punch, telling fellow Taoists Zhen Yuan and Hong Yun that the Wu clan has a major event coming up and invites them to join him there instead. He invites them to bear witness to the coming events. Zhen Yuan and Hong Yun exchange a surprised look before Zhen Yuanzi smiles, agreeing that there is no reason to refuse. After all, the 2 of them have no grand ambitions beyond wandering freely between heaven and earth, and with no urgent matters at Wuzhuang Temple, they are happy to tag along. As we follow his gaze, he turns his attention toward Kuan Pong. Surprisingly, Kuan Pong hasn't fled early this time, but remains seated in deep thought. He looks as though he is still processing the great Tao he glimpsed from the jade butterfly. Earlier, because of the matter involving the northern flag, a connection was formed. Considering that he had already established a bit of goodwill with Kuan Peng, and sensing the man might not be as rigid as expected, he decides to extend an invitation. While this involves a major turning point in history, Kuan Peng's current stance seems undecided. If he can be swayed now, it would be a significant victory for the Wu clan. In his mind, weakening an opponent while gaining an ally is a double win, so he asks with a smile, though Kuan Peng doesn't give an answer immediately. Instead of a cold refusal, Kuan Peng ponders for a moment, a faint, forced smile appearing as he says he won't join them now, but will surely come to offer congratulations later. With that, Kuan Peng stands and gives a respectful bow towards Xian Ming, Ho Tu, Jin Yuanzi, and Hong Yun before turning to leave the palace. Once Kuan Peng is gone, Hong Yun lets out a long sigh of relief, remarking that fellow Taoist Kuan Peng always seems so incredibly difficult to approach. He notes that Kuan Peng usually treats everyone with a cold face, which always felt a bit strange, yet his attitude toward our protagonist is quite different. With a look of pure curiosity and a hint of gossip, Hong Yun asks Wu Tian how he managed to build such a rapport with someone like Kuan Peng. He doesn't take the question too seriously, offering a light laugh as he explains it wasn't much, just a result of his brothers standing up to the two from the west. Because Kuan Peng kept his seat thanks to them, he felt he owed a debt, which he tried to settle by delivering the Northern Elemental flag later on. He explains that through this back and forth, they simply developed a bit of a friendship. Then, he signals for the group to begin their exit from Zixiao Palace. He is now in quite a hurry to return and consult with Di Jiang and the others about their next steps, with Xian Ming and Ho Tu walking closely by his side. Following behind, Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun exchange strange, meaningful looks. Jin Yuanzi whispers that if even Kuan Peng gave a flag to settle his debt, they should do something too. He worries that they cannot simply show up empty-handed. And to be honest, Jin Yuanzi seems genuinely distressed by the lack of a proper gift. While Kuan Peng only benefited indirectly from the Wu clan, these two brothers were the direct beneficiaries of his intervention against the Western duo. However, he has no extra innate spiritual treasures to give, and he certainly can't give away his Earth book. Meanwhile, the group finally steps outside the palace gates. As their auras shift, the power of the laws begins to surge, and the two naturally prepare to tear through the chaos to lead us back home. But Hong Yun steps forward with a smile, insisting that he take the lead since he is quite fast and still feels he owes a debt of gratitude. He feels it would be embarrassing to let Xian Ming and Ho Tu do all the work, so he volunteers. The two sisters stop and watch him with curiosity. Wu Tian, however, isn't surprised at all. After all, Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun arrived early during the first sermon, so their speed must be impressive. Jin Yuanzi nods with a smile, revealing that brother Hong Yun was actually the very first red cloud born between heaven and earth at the dawn of creation. While he might not claim to be the absolute fastest in the prehistoric world, his speed is certainly among the very best. Meanwhile, Hong Yun begins his move. He raises a barrier radiating a mysterious red light, and just by sensing it, Wu Tian can't help but feel a sense of genuine admiration. It seems Hong Yun is truly blessed by luck. Of the four elements, earth, water, fire, and wind, he has mastered three, lacking only the element of earth. Seeing this, Jin Yuanzi offers to lend a hand, striking out with a burst of power from his earth book to complete the elemental balance. This energy, thick with the scent of primordial earth and wood, blends perfectly with Hong Yun's power as they prepare to face the chaos together. As the five elements merge with the forces of water, fire, and wind, the energy transforms directly into the primal power of the four symbols. The red barrier flashes and turns a misty gray, the color of chaos itself, as if carving out a tiny, private world within the void. It completely shuts out the chaotic currents outside. Seeing this, Wu Tian's eyes light up, realizing why these two are such close companions. He laughs, noting that their powers complement each other perfectly, before stepping into the safety of the gray barrier. Xian Ming and Ho Tu are happy to take it easy for once and follow him inside. Soon, the five of them are racing back toward the prehistoric world. Since he is traveling with Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun, Wu Tian decides it would be impolite to simply meditate, so he strikes up a conversation. Xian Ming and Ho Tu listen quietly as the topic naturally turns toward the Duke of the East and the Queen Mother of the West. Hong Yun notes curiously that the Queen Mother didn't seem very willing to switch to the way of the immortals, given how quickly she departed. Suddenly, everyone is in the mood for a bit of gossip, with even Xian Ming and Ho Tu listening intently to the unfolding drama. After discussing the two leaders for a while, Jin Yuanzi sighs, remarking that the Duke of the East's choice might not necessarily be a mistake. It is truly difficult to resist such a path when a ready-made way of the immortals is right before one's eyes. Choosing it is only natural, as it is built upon the five elements. Once the internal weapons are perfected and the laws are balanced into a single entity, one gains the power to transcend the five elements entirely, which is why immortals are often called their masters. Or perhaps they are seen as those who transform yin and yang. Jin Yuanzi, born from the essence of the primordial earth and wood, naturally possesses the spirit of the five elements. This makes him perfectly suited for the way of the immortals. Yet walking another's path means being bound by their limitations, a thought that brings a sense of lingering reluctance. Zhen Yuanzi shakes his head with a sigh, reflecting the inner conflict shared by most of those who listened to the sermon in the Purple Cloud Palace. This explains why the reaction was so intense when the Duke of the East and the Queen Mother of the West switched paths, even though the great ancestor Hongjun offered 3,000 paths. The problem, of course, is how many people can actually find a path that fits them, especially when many of these great Tao imprints are inherently incomplete. Hearing Zhen Yuanzi's lament, Wu Tian feels a sudden spark of inspiration. He knows that in the future, Zhen Yuanzi will become the ancestor of Earth Immortals. He will eventually carve out his own unique branch of the immortal path and be honored as a founding patriarch. So Wu Tian decides not to keep his insights to himself. He smiles and tells his friend there is no need for such distress, noting that the Earth Book in Zhen Yuanzi's hands is a profound artifact that contains its own great Tao. If he can truly perceive it, he will find his own chance. Just as a saint entrusts their soul to the heavenly Tao, Zhen Yuanzi could entrust his soul to the Earth Book. Zhen Yuanzi's eyes light up instantly, but Wu Tian isn't finished yet. Remembering how the future Zhen Yuanzi uses the Earth Book to create a realm, he decides to share his own wisdom. He shares the way of the world he has realized, and a cluster of mysterious light flies out from his brow, a gift derived from his understanding of the jade butterfly of creation. He suggests that this insight into the way of the world might help his friend, encouraging Zhen Yuanzi to take his time and truly contemplate its depths. Zhen Yuanzi is both shocked and delighted, but Wu Tian simply laughs it off, explaining that sharing an insight doesn't mean he loses his own understanding of it. He only asks that if Zhen Yuanzi gains something new, he shares it back. He admits that as a member of the Wu clan, his own grasp of the great Tao might have its limits. He warns his friend that there might be gaps in this way of the world, and Zhen Yuanzi's expression shifts several times as he processes the weight of this gift. He is hungry for this knowledge, yet he feels a bit embarrassed. After all, he hasn't even repaid Wu Tian for standing up for them earlier, and now he's receiving another favor. After a long silence, Zhen Yuanzi bows solemnly and accepts the gift, admitting that he cannot repay such a profound kindness at this moment. He vows to keep this debt in his heart and tells Wu Tian to simply ask if he ever needs anything. Wu Tian merely nods with a smile as Zhen Yuanzi falls into a quiet state. Without standing on ceremony, Zhen Yuanzi begins to absorb the insights into the way of the world directly into his soul as a brilliant light envelopes him. After a short while, we see the Earth Book itself fly out from his body, hovering slowly above his head in a state of constant resonance. It radiates a deep, earthy yellow glow, and seeing this, the others refrain from disturbing him, while Hongyun works even harder to drive their vessel forward. Their small sphere of light crushes through the chaotic energy, flashing through the void toward the prehistoric world until they finally break through the primal barrier. As they enter the great desolate world, the Earth Book above Zhen Yuanzi's head flashes one last time before pulling its immense radiance back into his body. A moment later, Zhen Yuanzi slowly opens his eyes, which are now shimmering with a light of pure, unadulterated joy. Meeting their curious gazes, he laughs softly and announces that he has finally found his own path, inspired by the realization that saints and immortals differ in their connection to the world. He explains that while a saint's soul relies on the heavenly Tao for immortality, the Earth Book is inextricably linked to the very foundation of the great desolate land. As long as the Earth remains, the Earth Book remains, offering a unique form of eternal life and a legitimate path to the great Tao. Zhen Yuanzi could even spread this teaching, allowing others to entrust their souls to this path and strengthen their own power in the process. Though the finer details are still a bit hazy, the road ahead is clear, and he bows deeply to Wu Tian to thank him for the guidance. As he speaks, Zhen Yuanzi can't help but marvel at the weight of this karma. He was already indebted, and now this new enlightenment has made the bond even deeper. Deep down, he feels that such a profound kindness can never truly be repaid, for simple words of thanks seem utterly insignificant before the gift of a path. He understands this well, so he keeps his gratitude brief, choosing instead to etch the weight of this favor into his very heart. He is determined to find a way to repay Wu Tian, while Hongyun, seeing his friend's breakthrough, watches the scene with a mix of bashfulness and wonder. Hongyun eventually can't resist looking toward Wu Tian with an expectant gaze, leaving Wu Tian feeling a bit speechless at the silent request for guidance. After all, Wu Tian can hardly tell him that he needs to die first and be reincarnated as Shenong to achieve his destiny. That would be a bit awkward, wouldn't it? Besides, since Wu Tian's interference in the Purple Cloud Palace has already changed so much, it's unclear if Hongyun's original fate will even come to pass. Hongyun already possesses 3 of the 4 elemental powers. He simply needs to find the final one to complete his foundation and achieve his own Tao. And so, after a moment of quiet reflection, Wu Tian smiles and suggests that his friend should focus on ways to complete his own inherent laws. Wu Tian suggests that Han Yun should also contemplate the way of the world he gave to Jin Yuanzi, as he might gain his own insights from it. Han Yun nods eagerly, suppressing his excitement as he follows Wu Tian's guidance toward the Wu clan living at the foot of Mount Buzhou. Suddenly, two pillars of murderous aura soar into the sky, blocking Han Yun's path as the figures of Di Jiang and Zhu Juyin appear in midair. The two ancestral witches let out a roar, demanding to know who they are, while Han Yun and Jun Yuanzi quickly disperse their elemental powers. As their concealment fades and their true auras are revealed, Di Jiang and Zhu Juyin finally stay their hands and watch the group descend. Di Jiang circles Han Yun with a curious look, muttering that he never expected someone with such a soft personality to master the four elemental powers. It seems the rotation of those four powers had hidden their presence so perfectly that the two ancestral witches felt compelled to charge out. Han Yun is left speechless by Di Jiang's blunt assessment, unsure whether to laugh or be offended, though he knows the witches are simply blunt by nature. Wu Tian quickly steps in, explaining to his brothers that Jun Yuanzi and Han Yun are guests he invited to witness their upcoming ceremony. Turning to his friends, he notes that while the Purple Cloud Palace wasn't the place for secrets, here on Wu territory, he can speak freely. He simply explains their grand plan to announce the Wu clan's rise to Great Penghu and incorporate Mount Buzhou into the 12 Pillars array. Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun exchange a look, but Jin Yuanzi, the first man in the Great Desolate to master defensive formations, quickly catches on. He looks at Wu Tian with a knowing smile, and as their eyes meet, they share a silent moment of understanding that needs no words. Far from being bothered, Jin Yuanzi feels he has found a kindred spirit, remembering how he created his own Earth Book array out of caution. After all, while he and Han Yun have good reputations and never start trouble, their gentle natures often make them targets for bullies. He wonders, however, why the Wu clan, who are already so incredibly powerful and aggressive, would feel the need for such defensive preparations. It clearly looks like they are preparing for something big, but after a moment of reflection, Jin Yuanzi decides not to overthink it. Instead, he offers to share the secrets of his own Earth Book formation, suggesting that his insights might help them refine their own great array. Mindful of the kindness the Wu clan has shown him and Han Yun, Jin Yuanzi makes this generous decision without a second thought. He sees it as a way to repay a portion of his karmic debt, leaving Wu Tian both surprised and delighted by such a valuable offer. The secrets of the Earth Book are Jun Yuanzi's greatest trump card, yet he is willing to share them. Wu Tian considers this deeply and decides not to refuse. Instead, he solemnly thanks his friend. Jin Yuanzi is quite satisfied, feeling that he can finally be of some help to Wu Tian at last. It makes him feel better. After all, constantly owing such immense karmic favors might eventually affect his very path to cultivation. Di Jiang and the others are also quite delighted by this turn of events. Wu Tian originally intends to host a proper reception for the two guests, but Jin Yuanzi simply smiles and waves the idea away. He insists that time is of the essence and begins his explanation immediately as the Earth Book appears before him, glowing with a soft, earthen light. Every vein and node of the formation is displayed before the ancestral witches, representing the very ley lines of the Great Desolate itself. The points of light below represent the spiritual lands where energy is most concentrated. Jin Yuanzi explains slowly, but he doesn't stop there. Even without knowing the specifics of the 12 Pillars array, he uses his own mastery of formations to offer brilliant suggestions for improvement. The ancestral witches are focused. After all, they are comparing his insights to their own great array, so no one allows their mind to wander. They are far more attentive now than they ever were at the Purple Cloud Palace. Wu Tian also commits everything to memory, feeling new realizations dawn on him. The 12 laws within his soul shift and evolve. Just then, Ho-Tu gives him a gentle nudge and speaks to him through a private message. She admits she was confused why he was being so kind to these two for no reason, but now she sees he had this plan ready all along. The Earth Book formation is indeed exquisite. Having gained her own insights for their clan's array, Ho-Tu can't help but tease him a little. Wu Tian quickly tries to defend himself, telling Sister Ho-Tu that she has truly misunderstood his original intentions this time. He hadn't been aiming for the Earth Book at all. His initial plan was simply to disrupt the predestined seating arrangements at the palace. Back then, Hongjun had interfered to prevent the Wu clan from taking more seats. Naturally, Wu Tian wasn't about to let the old man have his way. He wanted to ruin Hongjun's plans, and besides, Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun are famous for being genuinely good men in a world of schemes. Being around them is comfortable, and one needn't worry about betrayal. He can't say all this out loud, of course, so Ho-Tu remains skeptical. Ho-Tu's eyes are filled with joy and relief, as if she is immensely satisfied with how he seems to have planned everything out so perfectly. Wu Tian decides not to argue, simply muttering to himself that they can think whatever they like, as long as the Great Formation is fixed soon. His main goal remains binding Mount Buzhou to their cause. After Jin Yuanzi finishes his explanation, the ancestral witches look deeply thoughtful and enlightened. Di Jiang is particularly delighted, realizing that while their 12 Pillars array is a top-tier inheritance from Pango himself, it is not easily altered. The ancestral witches haven't been idle, but they still faced many lingering questions about the formation's complexity until this very moment. By using the Earth Book's formation as a reference, their previous doubts instantly vanish. They all turn to look at Jin Yuanzi with burning intensity. Their piercing gazes make Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun feel a bit uneasy, leading Jin Yuanzi to ask cautiously if something is wrong. Di Jiang suddenly bursts into a loud laugh, telling them to stop using formal titles. From now on, they are brothers of the Wu clan. Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun laugh heartily at this, not caring who was born first, as they warmly address Di Jiang as their brother in return. They then turn their attention back to Wu Tian. He is genuinely happy to see this, marveling at how well the scene is unfolding before them. He wonders who could ever claim the ancestral witches lack wit, seeing how easily Di Jiang won over their two guests with a single gesture. Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun are actually quite flattered. It isn't just about the high status of the ancestral witches as Panga's direct descendants. While their own origins are equally prestigious, they don't care much for status. What truly moves them is the reputation of the Wu clan itself. It is well known throughout the Great Desolate that the ancestral witches have stubborn tempers and a very rigid sense of pride. They weren't even particularly respectful to the great ancestor Hong Jun, so being called brothers by such an insular group is a rare honor indeed. Di Jiang doesn't hold anything back now, preparing to discuss the 12 Pillars array and the future of the Wu clan with them openly. The witches no longer see them as outsiders, but Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun feel a bit hesitant, suggesting to Wu Tian that they shouldn't intrude on internal affairs. Jin Yuanzi mentions that Wu Tian's earlier insights gave him much to contemplate, and he would prefer to find a quiet place to cultivate and consolidate them. Since they insist on giving the clan some privacy, Wu Tian smiles and agrees, mentioning a perfect spot on Mount Buzhou where he can lead them. He is referring to the valley where the immortal gourd vine grows, as the main hall is a bit too thick with baleful energy for their comfort. We see that Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun, who cultivate using pure spiritual energy, find the main hall's atmosphere quite incompatible with their needs. The valley where the immortal gourd vine grows is far more suitable, as it is overflowing with spiritual energy and the power of natural laws. Wu Tian believes the vine's origins might even offer Jin Yuanzi new insights, and once he explains this, the ancestral witches agree it is a perfect choice. With a smile and a nod, Wu Tian leads the two guests toward the valley, but as they land before it, Jin Yuanzi and Han Yun look quite puzzled. To their eyes, the landscape before them appears completely empty and unremarkable, until Xing Tian suddenly steps out from the shadows. Xing Tian bows deeply, addressing Wu Tian as ancestral witch, which causes Jin Yuanzi and Hong Yun's eyes to light up with sudden realization. They had been unsure of his exact status, but hearing it from Xing Tian confirms that he is indeed an ancestral witch, which explains his bond with Di Jiang. A moment later, a new confusion arises. Aren't there only 12 ancestral witches? Wu Tian, however, doesn't seem to notice their bewildered expressions. He isn't particularly worried about them knowing his identity, simply smiling as he tells Xing Tian that his guard duty here is finished for now. He pats Xing Tian on the shoulder as a sign of encouragement, a gesture he picked up from Di Jiang to show appreciation to the great witches. To be honest, he doesn't have any physical rewards on hand, so he settles for offering a bit of spiritual motivation for the time being. Still, he resolves that for the merit of guarding the immortal gourd vine, he won't let Xing Tian meet his tragic, headless fate in the future. Xing Tian doesn't understand the sentiment, but asks no questions, believing that as the cleverest of the ancestral witches, Wu Tian must have his reasons. The warrior happily accepts the order to return to the tribe, telling Wu Tian to simply call for him if any other tasks arise. Once Xing Tian departs, Wu Tian turns back to the empty space and, under the curious gazes of his guests, lightly taps the air before him. Suddenly, a flash of 7-colored light sweeps across the valley, revealing the great formation that had been hiding everything from view. As an opening appears, Wu Tian gestures for brother Jin Yuanzi and brother Han Yun to enter, and the moment they step inside, they are struck with absolute awe.